All right, what is up, Copy Squad? We're live. I wonder if I should call it Copy Squad on this channel anymore, but I got Paul Mescetta here. This is a very prolific copywriter. He's written, based on what I know, about a bazillion sales letters, each for $1 zillion. And you work in like the self-help space then. So you've worked with is it Vitali? How do I pronounce it?
Vitali.
Joe Vitale, Dr. Joe Vitale, and Mindvalley. I think this is a really interesting place to do copy work because we've had some like spirituality folks inside of the Copy Squad inner circle, and we oftentimes, using my methodology specifically that we use for financial copy, I struggle a little bit helping them with getting like the messaging right for things like manifestation and stuff like that. And Joe's got a little bit of a background. Doesn't he have this book on like Ho'oponopono with this one dude from like Hawaii?
Yep, he does.
What's that all about?
So that comes from actually the guy from Hawaii who created it. He passed away recently. But the story behind it was that he was able to turn around one of the most violent, vicious prisons by using this 4-word mantra. I forget exactly what it is, but it's like, forgive me, I'm sorry, I love you, and something else. And basically, he would go into the prison every day and he would say that. And the story behind it is that he was able to change the energy in the prison, right? And so Joe is actually one of these guys that practices everything he preaches. So when you hear him talking about spirituality, law of attraction, visualization, positive mental attitude, he lives and breathes that stuff, right? Like when he wants a car, he literally figures out like how to attract it, right? He's got like his own process for doing that, right? He doesn't sit down with his eyes closed and meditate and the car just magically appears. But what he does do is he sets his mind to it, and then he'll come up with some sort of a plan to get what he wants. He'll create opportunities or new business ventures and things like that. And so he got a hold of this guy and basically wanted to take his methodology to the world. And so he co-authored a book with him called Ho'oponopono. And actually, my best friend, who I've known for 30 years, who's the godfather to my son, and he plays a lot into my story of how I got into copywriting. He's Joe Vitale's main publisher. And one of the biggest products that they have right now that they're killing it with on Facebook is a Ho'oponopono certification, where you can get the course and then go through the certification. And they kill it, man, all day long with that certification. I actually wrote the copy for it. If I remember correctly, it's like a hybrid sales letter. It's a sales letter that's like got copy on it, but it also has like a curriculum style look to it. Like it looks like you're taking like a college course or something like on Udemy. It's got that kind of vibe built into it.
That's one of the old classics, right? Like, don't let them know they're reading an ad is like what do you call it? The parable or whatever. So yeah, the expression I believe is, and I have a little bit of more fleshing out that story I could share too. It's just like, I love you, I'm sorry, forgive me, thank you.
There you go.
That's it. Yeah.
Yep.
And so what's unique about this, and so the book is called Zero Limits, he and that guy wrote. I read it a while back, and if you read it, you're gonna know it was written by a marketer. It's got all the classic things of like, there's a funnel in this somewhere that you'll pick up if you've been in the game. But yeah, so like the story of the prison was essentially the theme behind it was, I thought was really interesting because he's sort of saying that you craft your own reality is essentially like everything in the universe is energy. And basically you create reality. So if there's like pain in the world, he's basically taking responsibility for it. He's basically, well, it's my reality. So, and then he basically tells the universe. So the story in the book was that he would just look at all these guys' files, these very, really hardcore people, And then he would say, I love you. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Thank you. I think those are the 4. And essentially what he's saying is like, and I'm totally summarizing from what I can recall, but what basically he was saying is like, I created you because you exist and the reality is my reality. And like, it's kind of what I interpreted from it. So it's like, it's up to me to help fix and solve you because you're like a reflection of like my world or something like that. Is that somewhat accurate from your memory?
Yeah. Yeah, if I remember correctly. I mean, I couldn't even pronounce it when they first brought it to me. I actually had to do a call with him to learn more about it. But yeah, that's pretty spot on, I would say.
Yeah, I've been saying like with this new Kyle Milligan channel, there's all this stuff that I've sort of found myself coasting into, like spiritual and meditation wise. And I've needed like an outlet for it. So I was like, I'm gonna start my own little other side channel, like passion project. But I'm a marketer at heart, so I just bring on marketers for like podcasts and then talk about copy and shit. But I do want to explore. This is just my little bag for my headphones. I just usually have something in my hand randomly, but I do want to explore like this idea of like self-help as a niche, like especially stuff like this spiritual stuff. Like it's different. It's different. Like have you done other stuff too and you've seen differences like that?
Self-help is mainly all I've ever written. I've never written about financial. I've done very little about health other than my own offer that I have, which I showed you when we were in Orlando, the blood pressure supplement. Other than that, it's mainly been self-help. Like I really cut my teeth on self-help. I mean, the 100+ sales letters that I've written were all self-help. Everything you can imagine, goal setting, visualization, meditation, chakras, you name it. I've probably written about it. And really the story behind that is that, and I shared this with you, is my buddy who's like a born entrepreneur, hated school, called out sick every opportunity he could get. I don't even know how he graduated, but hated school, never wanted a full-time job, just a born entrepreneur. And I remember like there was a point in time where he wasn't working. And I was like, bro, what are you going to do? Are you going to get a job? And he's like, nah, man. He's like, I'm going to get a line of credit and try to learn, like start a new business, right? Like that's always been his thinking. So he starts this business in 2004, 2005, where him and his partner, they would go and find guys that were selling products on eBay that were hot selling items. And they would approach those guys and they would say, look, you got something that works here. Give us a chance to use our marketing methods to sell it on our own. Like you have nothing to lose. We won't compete with you. It'll just be an additional income stream for you. So they found this hypnotist. His name is Steve G. Jones. And he was selling all of these like physical hypnosis CDs on eBay. So they formed a partnership with him. And then they started taking everything digital. And he came to me and he was like, look, I need a copywriter and I can't afford a real copywriter. You're a salesman, so you're the closest thing I've got, because the only job I was ever good at were sales jobs, right? And so I was like, I didn't even know what a copywriter was. Like I thought copywriting was like when you copyright the rights to music or books or things like that. He's like, no, the same way you sell to people face to face, instead of speaking those words, you got to write them on a web page so that people will take out their credit cards and buy Steve's products. And so one product led to 2 products, led to 3 products. And then finally, these guys were like, look, we just want to dominate the entire spirituality, self-help categories in ClickBank. So we're going to create a brand new offer like every 2 weeks. And we want you to write the copy for every one of them. And there was like no research put into any of this. It was just like, what's on ClickBank, what's selling, what's got a high gravity score. Let's create a product and an offer that beats that. And I cranked these things out. Now, granted, most of them were to highly aware audiences. So I didn't have to write these huge sales letters, right? And a lot of it was to their email list, who was very familiar with them, but it still was over 100 letters over a 2-year period. And like I said, they ranged from everything from chakra to meditation to visualization to goal setting, NLP, pretty much anything you could think of in the self-help world, especially in the spirituality world, feng shui, I've written about it.
So when you're so this again, when you're writing this kind of stuff, whenever I sit down to write, I have what's called the beats of the sales letter. And there's a couple key components that I need to lock down to have a successful letter. And the beats are sort of the order of which we unveil these pieces of information. The big ones, the big three, are kind of ubiquitous in copy. And they're your mechanism, your, what I call it as a force of nature. And in financial, that's the money-making opportunity in the market. What is the market force that you're tapping into? You could do this in health too. If it's like gut bacteria, that's like the force of nature. That's the reason you can't get skinny. If it's getting into ketosis, that's a force of nature. That's about as close to a force of nature. You know, it's in your body. It's natural. Muscle confusion is a force of nature. And here's a tip for copywriters. You can, if you're dissecting copy, you can spot a force in nature. You can tell what the writer's force in nature is because they'll literally use nature-based words. Like our last promo breakdown in the Copy Squad Inner Circle, the writer called it the coming storm, a quake, and a wave. Those are all natural, nature-based words. And it's like, it's clear, obvious from the writing, the language he's using. This copywriter doesn't call it a force of nature because only me and like my people in my inner circle, my couple dozen people that know those breakdowns know what that term means. But that's why I selected that term, because it defines what we're really trying to get across, that this is a force of nature. So when we're talking about, I already am starting to brew up ideas like in my head for manifestation, right? Like the force of nature feels like the universe or the energy. You're tapping into something within the universe. And the reason I'm asking this question, I'll give you more specific with you, because this is where I'm struggling, because I've got a guy in the music space and he's teaching people how to mix tracks and basically get on billboards, get on top 100s. And he's placed people with like record labels. And he's struggling with his force of nature. And it's a little bit more woo-woo than the typical financial force of nature. And I want to make sure I do a good job for him. So I'm giving you all this context and then boiling it down for you. Like, how do you approach something like that when it's a little bit more nebulous?
Yeah. So let me start by saying this. When I wrote the majority of those sales letters, I mean, we're going back probably over 10 years ago, right? Because basically my copywriting career for other people was 2006 to probably around 2010, that 4-year period. And then what I realized was I was like, I'm in the wrong business. What I need to do is do what my clients are doing. They have email lists. They create these offers. They pay me to write them a sales letter. And then they send an email to their list and they make their money back that they paid me. And then they're in the positive forever. Right. And I was like, that's the business that I need to be in. So I shifted to info publishing. Right. So I haven't written, and then I did a few one-offs here and there, like from my friend, if he came to me with the right deal and he was like, we feel like you're the only one that could do it because you know the author so well and blah, blah, blah. And it was a nice package they put in front of me. I did a few one-offs. But when I was writing copy back then, I was actually not nearly as good of a copywriter as I am now as a result of Todd Brown and E5. So the way that I used to write copy back then, to be honest with you, was they would give me the product. So every product was basically an ebook and a bunch of audios. They weren't even doing videos back then. Maybe a couple of them, mostly ebooks and audios. I would go through the ebook, go through the entire outline of the book, and I would just pluck bullets out of there, right? And I would start with the bullets. Like, okay, here's everything that's in this thing. I'm going to map them out. I'm going to turn them into these juicy, benefit-driven bullets. And then kind of work my way out. Say it again.
Kind of reverse track a little bit. Pluck bullets. Let's say you got a totally green copywriter. Like a lot of my guys are coming over from other schools. Like they're just getting started. Some of my guys are finding me like through the YouTube algorithm. What does that mean? What do you talk about pluck bullets?
Okay. So bullets are short, punchy sentences that demonstrate features and benefits of the product. Okay. So what I would do is I would go into, like, let's say chapter 1 of the book, and I would pull out gems, benefits, features within that module, and I would just list them. And then once I had them all listed, I would then take them to another level and make them more benefit rich. So the bullets are a point in the copy where you're not reading a story, you're not reading a lead, you're not reading anything in a paragraph context. You're just seeing these sentences that have check marks next to them, or icons next to them, and they basically are a summary of the features and benefits that are in that product. And so I would always start with the bullets, right? I very rarely would sit down at a blank page and start writing a headline and then start writing a lead, because I would just sit there and be like, what should I do? This angle? Should I do that angle? What's the best headline? And that would just leave me frozen. So rather than thinking about something,
how would you know you found a bullet?
So if I'm going through the material and I can pinpoint some sort of a result or some sort of a benefit that's attached to what they are teaching in that specific part of the course, I know I have something that has the makings to be a good bullet point. Right? Yeah. So once I had my bullets listed out, the idea would then come to me. The angle would come to me. The hook would come to me, because I was so immersed in the course and in the product, right? And so then I would kind of like write the copy. Like I would start with the bullets, and then I would work my way up and think, okay, well, what's an interesting idea or an interesting hook that I could come up with as a result of going through this, right? And it would come to me. And that's how I would come up with an idea. But I would never really put that much time into like creating a big idea the way I do now, the way I know how to write copy now. I would just come up with a hook that sounded interesting and made sense, right? Was relative to what I'm talking about in the copy. And then from there, I go headline, lead, credibility statement, and story. Right? Like I told you about this, like story leads are historically, so a lead is the first 350, 500, 600 words in your sales letter. It's your elevator pitch. It's what you say to intrigue and captivate the prospect to want to hear the rest of what you have to say. My leads were generally story leads. Now, story leads historically are the most difficult and advanced type of leads to write, because you have to know how to, you need another skill set, right? Like you have to actually have a storytelling skill set, which I had, because I'm an Italian guy. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. We were born and raised on stories. I've been hearing stories since the day I was born, and I've been telling stories since as far back as I could remember. And so that was always my formula: bullets, idea, story lead that then connects to the introduction of the product and the bullets. And then the rest of the stuff was pretty cookie cutter, like guarantee, risk reversal, recap of the offer, bonuses, etc., call to action, recap again, another call to action. Like all of that stuff was pretty much templated. Like I had that, okay, I'm going to use this one, this one, this one. But really, that was my process back then for copywriting. Wasn't until I was introduced to Todd and learned the E5 formula that my copywriting became way better and way more advanced. So back then, to answer your question, I really wasn't writing great copy. I was writing like good enough copy, right? And it wasn't until I had that paradigm shift that now I put a lot more time, effort, and energy into crafting copy the way it should be written, so that it can go to the coldest audiences and still convert.
Yeah. And so I'm plucking little ideas from this, so that maybe I can go back to my guy that I'm helping. But like, I like this idea. I would start with bullets. So, I can maybe get him to evaluate his own product that's a difficult part too, when it's your own work or your own product, to sit down and say, well, what's valuable here? And everything's valuable. None of it's fluff. It's all perfect. But you have this whole approach back in the day where you would pluck out bullets to sort of get your theme. So yeah, I think one of the things, I had never even told you all three of the things that we core look for, which, mechanism, force, and nature. And the last one was the result. And for him, it's like, fill up the clubs as a DJ, run up the charts as a top 100, get signed to a label. And sort of like, he knows how to do that. He has a system for mixing tracks. And then it's like, well, what's the force in nature? How do I present it? And that's where we're at a bit of a sticking point. Off the top of your head, like if you were to like throw one out of this,
I would probably look at an analogy. See, I don't always go to force of nature when I come up with an idea. You do, because you're used to writing in contexts that force of natures are really relevant to, and they make sense, right? Whereas I would come up with more of like an analogy, right? So I'll put it to you this way. I just had a client come through Todd's E5 coaching, and hers, what she teaches is a feng shui approach to get women pregnant. So if you're a woman, you can't get pregnant, you've tried everything, you've tried in vitro, you tried every traditional approach to get pregnant. She has an approach and she's got results. Like, she's done this with multiple women and gotten them pregnant by changing the furniture arrangement in their house. So that's basically what feng shui is. It's when you change the energy in your house by rearranging your furniture. And she knows which way they have to be, which way the couch has to point. And it's all based on energy and the way that the globe is. I can't really remember it, to be honest with you, but she's very good at what she does. And I had to pull all this out of her. And so the idea that we came up with, and which is really true, it was an analogy. It was an analogy that a woman actually has two different bodies. They have a physical body, and then they also have a spiritual body. And most women are doing all the work on the physical body, and they're completely ignoring the spiritual, hidden, unseen aspects of their body, right? And so the idea is you have two bodies, right? So we went more like we went more in the direction of an analogy as opposed to maybe necessarily a force of nature, right?
So I gotta.
But I could give you a force of nature that I think would probably work well. I'm working with a music guy now, and he teaches people how to play guitar. Specifically, he teaches people who are already playing guitar how to play better. And so his mechanism is this thing called microaesthetics, where it's not based on music theory. It's not based on how good of a player you are, but how you can manipulate the sound of a song to make it sound better to the listener. So the idea that we came up with, and maybe this is a force of nature, is that the best musicians in the world, not all of them, but a lot of them, know more about psychology than they know about music theory. So examples that he gives are like Ed Sheeran. He is not known as like a savant guitar player, but yet he can wow millions upon millions of people because he knows how to make songs sound very, very emotionally compelling when he plays them. And so microaesthetics harnesses that psychological trick that these not so great guitar players know and utilize to make their music sound exceptional to the listener.
It's funny that you say the psychological trick thing. So what you basically just did is it's whatever phraseology you want to use, like microaesthetics harnesses blank. Whatever the thing is after that word, whatever the mechanism uses blank. Mechanism taps into blank. That's the force of nature. It's funny you say that because the thing that we're going with so far has definitely been revolved around almost like neuroscience, like brain chemistry, that your brain responds to certain patterns that make it stickier, that make the music stickier, that make you more engaged with it. What we haven't done, what I think we could do, having listened to the microaesthetics thing, we could probably give that a label, like P90X gave muscle confusion a label. Instead of saying, well, your muscles respond to new stimuli and explain it. Or they could just say, muscle confusion.
Yep.
We need a label. That's what we need. Okay. This will be good. Rodney's got a little comment. My brain goes to tapping into the spiritual body. If you know how to tap into your spiritual body, you could get pregnant. Yeah. So the spiritual thing in the feng shui was, you've got so much like spiritual stuff. I just don't take you as a very meditative, like sit on a pillow kind of guy. Is it just your job? Like,
I mean, I do meditate, not as often as I want to, but it's funny when Safrina, who's the girl with the feng shui offer, when she came in to do the E5 coaching, it was almost destined that she wound up with me because I have so much experience in this world, right? And so when we do this thing called a unique mechanism interrogation, where we basically interrogate the shit out of your unique mechanism so that we have the firepower in the campaign to educate, right? So for people that don't know, Todd Brown's E5 system is all based on educational-based marketing and about educating the prospect about the mechanism, not about your offer, not about your course. It's all about educating the prospect on the mechanism, why the mechanism is different, and more importantly, why it's superior. So we do these unique mechanism interrogations where we ask people, like, what do you do first in your system? What do you do second? Why do you do it that way? Why do you do it in that order? What have you combined? What have you subtracted? What's different about the way you do it from the way your competitor does it? What's the result that they get because you do it differently? And for a lot of course creators, coaches, consultants, product owners, it's a painful experience, but we go through it and we get it out of them. The issue or the challenge was when we do the unique mechanism, there's a proof element. So every time we make a claim about the unique mechanism, we have to supply a proof piece as to why it's true. The problem is when you're dealing with stuff like spirituality, I think we talked about this, right? Is that how do we make sense of the world as human beings? It's really, we use two things. We use comparison. So we compare experiences to previous experiences that we've had. And that's how we decide how we formulate an opinion about something. That's how we decide if we like a hamburger or we don't. Or if we like a piece of pizza, we compare it to another piece of pizza that we ate. If we meet a guy or a girl, how do we decide whether we're into them? Because we compare them to other people that we've been in relationships with. And secondly is we use our five senses, right? That's kind of how we make sense of whether or not something is true, is if we can touch it, see it, feel it, hear it, experience it. The problem with a lot of spirituality stuff is that those rules don't apply because you can't necessarily experience a lot of that stuff with your five senses. And many people don't have a previous experience to compare it to and contrast it to. And so if she would have been with, let's say, another coach that hasn't done this before, that coach might have been too hung up on proof in the form of physical evidence. And Todd always says, when we supply proof, it doesn't always have to be physical evidence. In many cases, the proof is just a logical, reasonable justification for why you made the claim. Right?
Could that be like one of those like paradox sentences where it's like, well, I mean, I wish I had something on the top of my head. Well, it's like one of those lines where like, think about it. Would such and such happen if not for duh? And then like, that's like that sort of statement.
Yeah. It's kind of that's one version of it. It goes back to like Robert Cialdini's book, right? That's like the first book I ever read on persuasion, influence, the science of persuasion. He wrote the book over 30 years ago. He's the guy who He's the guy who identified the weapons of persuasion. He's the guy that identified scarcity, authority, commitment, consistency, etc. And one of the case studies or examples that he gives in the book is they ran this experiment where they wanted to test the compliance rates of people by simply changing the way somebody phrases something. So they had a bunch of people waiting online to make copies, and they basically had this girl go up to them and ask if she could cut ahead of them and skip them in line. And by her adding the word because, the compliance rate significantly increased. So when she said, like, for example, do you mind if I cut you in line? I don't remember what the exact statistics were, but let's say 10% of people said, okay, you can cut me, right? When she said, can I skip ahead of you because I'm in a rush? 50% of people let her go. When she said, can I skip ahead of you because I'm in a rush, because I need to make some copies, like 75% of people let her cut ahead. But if you think about it, what did she really say? She said, can I cut ahead of you because I'm in a rush, because I need to make some copies? But everybody there needs to make copies. But it was the use of the word because 2 times that increased the compliance rate. So the point is this: when you justify a request or when you justify a statement, as long as it is not something that is complete bullshit or completely preposterous and unbelievable, people tend to accept the claim more. In fact, many readers want to accept your claims. They want to believe your claims. They just need something to reinforce it, to make them feel better about believing it. So that's a lot of what we did in her campaign. Instead of looking for actual solid, hard proof, we just looked for justifications as to why she was making the claims that she was making.
Okay. So when you're lining that up, do you have one or two throwaway examples you could throw away, just like give us of what that would look like?
So if, like, for example, like Joe Vitale is really good with coming up with new ideas and new mechanisms, right? And so, like, one of the ideas that he kind of pioneered very recently is this idea of counter intentions. So in the beginning, like the law of attraction, when people didn't really know about The Secret and the law of attraction was really hot in like 2007, from like 2007 to like 2012, everything was about intentions. You have to tune into the universe. You have to visualize. You have to align your vibration with the universe. Intentions. But once the intention thing wore out its welcome, he moved on to counter intentions, which basically say that no matter how much visualization you do and how much you try to tap into the universe, etc., if you have counter intentions that are subconsciously buried in your mind, you're not going to be able to move past that and attract the things that you want, right?
Okay.
And so in his courses, when he would make a claim about, like, for example, visualization alone is not enough to get you to attract the things that you want. Okay, so that's his claim. But what's the proof? Well, the proof is that you have these subconscious counter intentions that you're not even aware of, that were probably installed in you at the age of 7 by your parents or other people that you viewed as authorities in your life. And now you're carrying that baggage around with you, and that's what's stopping you from getting what you want. So that's the justification. That's the explanation for making that claim.
Okay. So so we have is a couple things to unpack there. So like in my group, we would call that like the super problem. If this problem were taken care of, all other problems would sort of go their way. And then and again, this isn't like not poking holes. Sounds like a new sort of marketing expression for a limiting belief that if you actually don't think you deserve success, then you don't get success. Like if you don't think you're a funny person, then when you go to tell a joke, it'll fall flat. Like these things are subconsciously buried. So if like you're sitting here, I want a Corvette, I want a Corvette, I want a Corvette, but you don't feel actually worthy of driving a Corvette. You don't feel like a person who belongs in a Corvette because you feel like a piece of trash because, you know, your grandmother told you eat too many Oreos when you were like 4 or something. Like that's been carrying with you this whole time. That's kind of what's happening here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, I'll give you another example. Like, so another thing that we do with E5 is a marketing argument where we present a rock solid case as if we were arguing in front of a jury, as if we were an attorney arguing in front of a jury. And so we follow a very strict protocol when it comes to making claims. So every claim has to have a proof point. Every claim has to have a proof point. Every claim also has to have 3 levels of benefits. There has to be a functional benefit, which is what they get from the claim functionally, like what it does. A dimensionalized or an experiential benefit as to like what that benefit looks like in the life of the person. And then an emotional component, like what do they feel as a result of being able to experience that benefit. So the way that we come up with these claims is we think of gap questions, which are basically objections. We think of, okay, well, what's a question that the prospect is going to have in their mind that's going to form a gap between where they are and where we need them to be in order to take us up on our offer. So we come up with a gap question and then we make a claim based on that. So like in her case, one of the gap questions was, my doctor is not optimistic of my chances. So how do I know if this is going to work for me? Right? Now, it's very difficult. Okay, so that's a question. Okay, so the claim is this will work for you even if your doctor is not optimistic of your chances. That's the claim. So how do you prove that? Like, how do you prove a medical doctor wrong when you're talking about something spiritual that's very hard to prove? You use a justification for why you made that claim. And the justification was your doctor isn't trained in holistic approaches, right? So while doctors are extremely intelligent, educated, and valuable, their expertise is limited to one specific type of approach. Most medical doctors don't even know what a true healthy diet looks like, right? Doctors are just quick to prescribe medication. So it's a paradigm shift. We're not necessarily going to challenge what a medical doctor says about getting pregnant because we would lose that argument. What we do is we make a different argument and we justify that claim in a different way by saying your doctor doesn't even know about holistic approaches. Mm-hmm. So it's a completely different way of justifying the claim. Does that make sense, Kyle?
Absolutely. And to reframe that, like, I feel like if you and I just kind of walk through our process together, there's certain lessons that have to be said about 40 different ways, the same content with a different sort of expression, when then it'll click for someone like, oh, I get it now. There are guys who have been under my tutelage like 2 years ago, and the first lesson I gave them was do the least. And they'll send me a Slack message like today and be like, oh shit, I get it. It's like it finally fucking clicks. But like, so what you're describing, if you were in my school, like my copy camp or whatever you want to call it, when it comes to this paradigm shift, something that I really try to invoke and pass on to the copywriter is, I view it as like a bone in your forearm. Their paradigm, their worldview is bone solid, rock solid. You have to break it. You have to break that bone. And the way that I look at the fixing of it, another analogy I use is like there's this Japanese thing, which it's a terrible analogy because I never remember what it's called. You break the plate, you glue it all back together with the glittery gold. I'm not sure if you know what I'm talking about either.
It's jogging my memory.
But essentially what it is, it's like if there's broken china or broken glass or broken dish, you don't just like scrape it all up and throw it away. You actually collect all the pieces. You glue it all back together with like this gold glue, and it's like now it's art and it's more beautiful. Like it's like a metaphor for being like a damaged
Okay.
person or something, I think. But I use it
Okay.
as a metaphor for copy. So the same thing with like the broken bone, the broken dish. What you want to do is you want to insert. You don't want to shatter it to pieces. You know, that's like too much. You're asking too much. You don't want them to like question their entire lives, but you want to put a crack in their reality and make them go, you know, like you just want them to have a moment's pause. I don't want my copywriter to be racking their brain about how to flip this person's world upside down, but introduce the idea that there might be something missing or something that here's the thing that I really, really, really fight back on beginner copywriters. They always, even the junior on my team, when he started, he'd been working on my team for 6 months, writing short form and offers. That's how I ramped them up to get used to the flow and cadence of writing copy. When I finally get him to do his first promo, he's been on all our calls. I've said this a bajillion times. We get to the super problem and he labels it, they don't know. And I'm like, the super problem can't be ignorance. It has to be an erroneous action. So, for instance, let's look at the spiritual feng shui. You didn't know about feng shui, so you couldn't get pregnant. No. The problem is due to the fact that you've been practicing only physical, approaches. That means the erroneous action is you have neglected the spiritual approach. That's the erroneous action. You have actually caused toxicity in your spiritual pregnancy journey. You have been sabotaging it. You've absolutely destroyed your chances of getting pregnant because you didn't know, but because you've only been focusing on the physical. So there is a problem that someone go, oh my goodness, I never knew that. But that's where I get a chance. Like at first I have to crack their worldview just a little bit. And I'm like poking the hole in the dam, so to speak. Like I cracked that worldview just a little bit. Then there's the space for that shiny gold glue for me to rebuild and put my mark on their reality, to put my code into their sequencing of how reality is formed, like a genetic sort of transposition of like DCAG shit. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And that what you're talking about there is like that's like persuasion 101, right? That's persuasion 101, because when people have a belief or an opinion or a point of view, they will defend those points of view, even if you supply them with all sorts of evidence to show them why they're wrong. It doesn't matter, right? And so people need ways. There are lots of different ways that they kind of restore that off balance of when some piece of information comes their way that is counter to what they believe. So first they might rationalize it, right? They might find excuses or reasons to justify, right, why that loss of balance is acceptable. They might deny it. They might deny that the problem even exists and that it's not true, right? They could use correction, where they try to find evidence to support why your information is inaccurate. They could reframe it, meaning they just reframe the entire situation and change it into something else, or they could separate themselves from it and say like, well, it's not that important to me anyway. But the best tool to use when you're changing someone's belief is to supply them with a piece of information, like you said, that they weren't aware of, because that gets them off the hook. That gives them an excuse to be wrong, because there was a part of the puzzle that was missing that they weren't aware of. And so that kind of allows them to not have as much accountability for being wrong in the way that they were thinking. And now they become a little bit more open to this new belief that you want them to have.
Yeah, and it's funny because like when I first I have a really deep like ramp up period for copywriters, and the reason I do it this way is because I remember at a certain publisher like kind of getting thrown in the deep end, and a lot of good copywriters came out of there because I don't know, top G's rise to the top, like alpha dogs find a way, I guess, whatever you want to call it, like survival of the fittest, like the cream goes up. Like even when they're thrown in the deep end, they'll find a mentor, they'll find help, they'll make it work, and everybody else just like fell off. But I do feel like there were a lot of capable people who just didn't. Not all copywriters are go-getters. Like, not all copywriters are extroverts. There are copywriters at publishing houses are still, 2-3 years in the game, piss scared to talk to their guru and ask questions, like do a mechanism interrogation. They've never been on a phone with a guru. They talk through their publisher, through their copy chief, through like an email chain where they never even talk to their editor. So there's a lot of capable writers who somehow manage to still have success despite this crippling fear of humans, that I want to help install like little systems for them to, again, they start with me, short form and offers. Because like you said, even back in your like you're just kind of winging it days, you still had a boilerplate offer. Like you knew what to do there, get in the flow of writing that stuff. So one of the things that you said there that lets the reader off the hook. Whenever we get to what I call the super problem section, which I think I got that term from Rich Schefren back in my Agora Financial days. I think he's the first person I heard say super problem. When we get to the super problem section and they're about to begin it, I have rules. Like this is, especially if you're a beginner, don't break the rules if this is your first promo, because these things just work. Like it's not going to be like, you're not going to come. No one's going to praise you for having the most clever sales letter, but it is built to work. And that line is, it should start with, it's not your fault. So if you haven't result, if you haven't been able to get pregnant despite doing this, and this, there's something you need to know now. It's not your fault. You see, there are two different types of bodies. There's the physical body, which you have been doing your best, your damnedest, and taking care of all as hard as you could possibly go. Unfortunately, there's a second spiritual body that's probably going to shit, because you've been neglecting it, treating it poorly, and probably just damaging it left and right with the way that you've been beating yourself up about not even being able to get pregnant. So that's the whole, now they're off the hook. Like you unwittingly have been sabotaging yourself through this erroneous action, and it's not your fault. Here's why.
Same thing with the counter intentions. You've been visualizing. You have a vision board. You've been doing affirmations. You've been speaking in the positive. You've been speaking in the present tense as if you already have the things that you want. And that's all great, but there's a reason you haven't been able to attract what you want, and it's not your fault. It's because you have these counter intentions that are hidden in your subconscious mind that were installed there many, many moons ago and continue to haunt you and halt your progress. But the good news is I figured out a way to overcome those counter intentions and fix that problem so you can experience the life that you want, and blah, 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 blah. Same thing.
Yeah. And what's so funny, and I say this all the time, I hope, because this is long form stuff, so I'm a little pessimistic that my YouTube audience who follow the copywriting channel, where I got like 10-minute like tips on how to do copy, I'm nervous that they won't come here, sit through this, and see some of the, first off, like just, I love that we're bouncing similar concepts different ways, because what you're bringing to the table is there's another way to understand these concepts, because I've said it before, like the more you get into something and you follow enough masters and people who know what they're doing, you realize that almost everybody who has success in almost any arena are all saying the same things that they learned on their own journey. So they have different labels and different ways of expressing and experiencing these things, but they're really basically the same things, I give it one label, you give it another label. And I think what's really cool, we have this little, like, where we just kind of riff, just you riff, I riff. We talk about, we talk as if we're in the copy. And so my whole sales spiel with new, easy, safe, and big, the Nesby emotions, is that copy is a language. And I don't feel like I ever in my videos really sit down and just demonstrate the language. But when you and I talk and we go into like a moment of just basically writing that section of copy with our mouths, you can see someone speaking the language. It's like we just switched to Swahili right here on camera, because that's how you talk. When you talk copy, you say it's not your fault. You haven't been able to get the result. You've tried everything. Like there are things that when you know you're going to sit down and write copy, here's the word bank I'm going to access. And I know I'm going to access this word bank because this triggers the emotions that makes people think like, I must have this. This is what, have you read $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozy? The
Yep.
Nesby emotions, he calls them the 4 value drivers. He literally like
Yeah.
uses the exact same things, almost with the exact same labels that I use. He calls them the value drivers. The whole world is governed by value. And value is a little bit contextual. It changes a little bit, but you like almost anything can come back to like new, easy, safe, and big. I've been trying to like figure a way out to force new, easy, safe, and big into like relationships. And I have a little bit of a theory like, oh, a new person who's exciting and different. This could be the guy or the girl. As easy to talk to. I could feel like myself. I just feel comfortable. And comfortable would be safe. I feel safe around them. I feel secure.
Yep.
I feel like I could trust them. And then the big is the result, right? It's like, this is going to change my whole life. My whole life will never be the same again now that I've met this person, right? So that's new, easy, safe, and big for love, right?
Yep.
Sequel coming out. You do like NLP stuff. So coming off that value talk, hard pivot. I was on your Instagram and I signed up for the Street Smarts Persuasion. I did not receive it to my Gmail. I was actually just checking just now, make sure I wasn't full of shit. I didn't get it in my Gmail, which is unfortunate. But I knew I wanted to learn more about NLP and stuff. Because real quick, you're like a persuasion guy who also does copy. You're like a persuasion guy.
I'll pop
NLP,
the link in the chat for you, so you got it there. But I'll put it to you this way. So I started I have an interesting journey of how I got into this persuasion stuff. So when it comes to persuasion and influential communication, I tell people that I had basically 6 educations in persuasion. Okay. And I'll go through them really quick. The first one was my school era. So that's like, I was born in 1979, started school in like, I don't know what, 83, 84, something like that. So from 84 to like 97 was like my introduction to this concept of powerful communication. And what I mean by that is like, I grew up, I'm an only child, no brothers and sisters. My mother has 15 brothers and sisters. 2 of her brothers lived on my block. They had like a total of 8 kids. And my grandparents lived on my block. So I had like 15 relatives living on my block as I grew up. So I was always surrounded by family. But when I went home at night, I was by myself. I had to play by myself. And I was kind of like a lonely kid. And so what I learned is in school is if like I can shock people, I was a class clown. And sometimes to the extreme, like to the point where I was a little too out of control. But I did learn that if I could get people's attention and I could make them laugh, I can make friends, right? And so I realized that like at an early age, like I can make friends and I can make people laugh. So then my second education came. And what I call this is when I was introduced to something called systematic influence. So I graduated high school in 1997. I have no idea what I want to do with my life. I know everything I don't want to do with my life. I don't want to get a regular 9-to-5 job. I don't want to have a boss. I don't want to have to friggin' fight with people to get vacation time. I want to make a lot of money because my dad had some mental health issues that he went through when I was in my early teenage years. He basically had a nervous breakdown because he shifted careers and his career didn't go the way he wanted. And so he basically had a complete nervous breakdown over finances. And I didn't want to ever have that happen to me. So one of my things was I want to make a lot of money, right? So I graduate high school and my buddy comes to me and he's like, hey, my cousin got this job on Wall Street and they're hiring people. And like these guys are making tens of thousands of dollars. And all you have to do is give you a bunch of leads. You got to call people up all day long, be a cold caller and just call people up and you can make thousands of dollars. I was like, sign me up. All I got to do is make phone calls and I can make tens of thousands of dollars. Sign me up. So I graduate high school in June of 97. I take this job in July of 97. So I work at this job from July 97 to the end of August. So 2 months. And I was introduced to this concept of systematic influence. What I mean by that is when I walked in that room, I saw 30 to 40 guys with sales scripts in front of them, cold calling people on the phone and taking them from the person wanting to hang up on the phone to being open to the conversation, to then being interested in the conversation, to then any objection or rebuttal could be overcome to the point that the person would then place an order for a stock over the phone for sometimes 10, 15, 20, 30, $50,000 to a perfect stranger. So there was a system and formula for everything. And that was mind-blowing to me, that you could actually control a sales situation with a script by knowing exactly what to say and what to do every time someone says something to you. So my next education was what I call dynamic influence. And this was my prison era. So that job that I had was a completely illegal boiler room operation, like exactly what you would see in the movie Boiler Room or The Wolf of Wall Street. So now when I first got this job, I was 17. I was 17 in July. I turned 18. I only worked there for 2 months. So the first week or so that I worked there, I didn't know that the whole thing was illegal, but I figured it out. Probably like in the first week, I figured out, okay, this whole thing is illegal. I didn't really realize how illegal it was, but it was certainly illegal. I knew it was illegal, and I stood there and I did it anyway. After about 2 months of that, I was like, you know what? I don't want to do this with my life. This is not how I want to start my life. So I bounced, got a regular job, did the stuff that I didn't want to do, took a regular job in Manhattan, brown bagged my lunch every day. So about a year and a half later, the FBI comes to me and they're investigating everything that went down at this place. And basically what they wanted me to do was cooperate with them and put a bunch of people in jail. And I didn't want to do that. And so because I didn't want to do that, I was charged. And I wound up at 20 years old in a federal prison for 5 months. 5 months in prison and 5 months on house arrest. Well, in this little stint that I did in federal prison, I was then introduced to this concept of dynamic influence. So what I mean by that is systematic influence is like when you have a script and a system and a formula to influence people. Dynamic influence is kind of like you have to learn how to communicate with people using unwritten rules. So like you have to know, like, first of all, you have to know how to carry yourself. You're constantly teetering on the seesaw between letting people know you're not to be pushed around and walked over, but not overstepping your boundaries to where you're causing a problem where there isn't one. And the next thing you know, you're in a confrontation with somebody just because they think that you overstepped, right? You have to learn what people's true intentions are, who's honest, who's not honest, who you should be communicating with, how you're perceived when you're communicating with certain people. So like I had a corrections officer. I pretty much got along with everybody in the place, luckily. I had a correction officer that liked me and wanted to talk to me. And she came in my cell one night and we were talking for like 5 minutes. And then she left. And right away, somebody else came over to me and was like, that's a no-no. You don't ever let the correction officer in your cell. And I was like, why? They're like, because then it looks like you're a rat. It looks like you're communicating with the CO and you don't want. So I had to learn all these things, bro. I'm a 20-year-old kid, never been in a situation like this in my life. And I had to learn this stuff and I had to adapt on the fly. And so that was like my introduction to dynamic influence. Then came my introduction to salesmanship. So I got out of there, couldn't get a regular job. The only jobs I could get were sales jobs, which I had before. So I got back into sales, but this time I got into selling fitness because I said, you know what, if I'm going to get into sales, I want to do something that can really help people that I believe in, where if they have an objection, I don't feel guilty overcoming that objection, right? Because unless they can't afford it or it's not convenient for them, there's really no justifiable objection you could give me for not joining a gym. And that also honed my sales skills. Because even though I got all this sales experience at this other operation, at the end of the day, it was an illegal operation and you're misleading people and you're lying to people. So it's always easier to sell to people if you lie to them, right? If you're promising them stuff that's never going to happen, of course it's easy to close them. This was different. This was true salesmanship. And I learned how to sell the right way and how to sell with integrity and do the right thing. And while I was doing that, that's when my buddy started building his business, came to me for help. I helped him build his business. And that was my copywriting era from like 2004 to 2011, where I was really introduced to direct response marketing. And then my final kind of era in this communication education is where I am now, from 2011 to where I am now, where I've trained thousands of people when it comes to influence, persuasion, communication. I've created over 50 different trainings. I've helped grow numerous online companies from 0 to 7 figures. But the reason why I got into this niche is because when I decided that I wanted to shift from being a copywriter to being an info publisher, I was like, what's the only thing I'm really qualified to teach people? It's communication skills. And I didn't want to teach copywriting at that point. I wanted to teach more of these other experiences that I learned and gained from in the real world, because I felt like I had a unique wisdom and experience that not very many people had. And so that's what I felt made me different and more valuable than everyone else that was teaching that stuff.
That's a roller coaster. And it's funny because like almost everyone who ends up like in copy was sort of like, it's always almost like an accident. Like very few people are like, man, I really want to be a copywriter. I mean, it's getting to be more popular now. It's actually like, but a lot of people had a means to an end. Like for me, I was trying to write and sell novels. I actually did want to be a writer. I didn't want to be a copywriter. I wanted to sell my novels, which I didn't. I wrote novels the way that you wrote copy, like your first year. Like I was just like, I have this thing I'm gonna write. My first novel was like entirely too. It was like twice the length of Harry Potter, and I didn't know that man. It was too fucking long winded. But yeah. So I wanted to sell those fucking novels, and the internet said I needed to learn how to do marketing, and to do marketing I had to learn copywriting. And the next thing I know, I'm a copywriter, and I'm surrounded by people really smart, know how to do it, and they taught me how to do it. And I was eager to learn because I really wanted to sell those novels. So, and your second, did you get a federal, what do you call it? Did you get a felony for that?
I got a youthful offender because remember, I was 17. I literally turned 18 the month I worked there. I started in July and I turned 18 in July. So like the reality is if you commit a crime under the age of 19 and you're a first-time offender, you are considered a youthful offender. And I ticked all those boxes. I never got in trouble before in my life. Like I said, I only worked there for 2 months. I could have walked away from the entire thing scot-free if I would have just testified against the guys that own the place, but I didn't want to do that. They were close friends with my friend's friend who got me the job. And like at the end of the day, like I said, in the first few days, I didn't know it was a scam, but I did it after that. And so I felt like if you know you're doing something wrong, even though I chose to leave a month and a half later, it's like, I feel like if you do something wrong, you know the consequences, you know what's at stake, you know, ratting out other people and making their life worse when you knew what you were getting yourself into is just not the way to do it. And at that time, I was also a different person. I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I was very kind of argumentative with the prosecutor. I pissed him off a little bit. And I just like, you know what, man, in some weird way, at that point in my life, I thought like going to jail was like cool, right? Because I thought it would get me attention and it would make people think I'm tough. And, you know, I look back on it now and I'm like, I was an idiot, right? But I was a kid. I was 17, 18 years old. Like I said, when I went there, I was 20, but youthful offender. That's what I got.
Yeah. So I want to touch on a couple of things here. But first off, at this stage of the podcast, 50% of my guests have been in federal prison at one point. It's like my first guy was Rob Braddock, and he had a little stint in prison. And it's funny because he's got like a little bit of a reddish beard and a little bit of gray hair, and he's about your age. And so I guess I just gravitate and attract. I manifest you people into my life, you bearded, gray-faced prisoners. So some of the things that I talked about with Todd are kind of shining through here. I can tell, and I've talked about this, like I have a little Monday thing that I do for about an hour where I just kind of like talk into the camera for anyone who listen. My team is supposed to be chopping this shit up. That's why I do it. Now I just got all this long form shit that's just sitting there collecting dust. They'll be chopping it up. But one of the things that I've been talking about is As I'm ascending like in age, I'm recognizing the differences in generations. When I talked to Todd, it really shone through. Like some of the things that he thought and believed came through. And I pointed it out on our podcast. Like you take that stuff for granted, Todd, but there's a lot of shit you're saying here is a lost art. Like, it's like a lost, it doesn't exist. Like this idea of I'm not gonna rat on them because it's my friend's friends. Like I I wouldn't do that. Like these sorts of standards and boundaries, it feels like there's not much of a compass. There's no code anymore. This is something I've been like, um, and this actually is why I wanted to ask you about NLP. I would say I've been coming to terms with this. Because the world has this today. I'm seeing it more and more and more and more. Is like, well, men are the problem, and women are the problem, and toxic masculinity, and this and that, and I'm starting to recognize there's these immutable laws of nature, and the world, when it doesn't fit like a person, they say, well, that's the problem. And the person never says, well, I'm the problem. And so there's a lot of stuff here. Like I'm watching the world sort of evolve in real time. And it's only because I'm now in my 30s. Like I've just been around long enough to see patterns. And so I don't think as a young person, unless you're around like multiple generations of people, can see the difference in their behavior. I'm just now sort of coming to grips with a lot of this stuff. But like talking to Todd, the way he talks about like his family, his upbringing, like the way that his moral compass and code seems to come out just at random times in conversation, like everything's like a moral decision, like like
Oh yeah.
yeah, like what do I believe kind of comes up more often with him. But I was just kind
Oh
of
yeah.
listening, and I wanted to sort of point it out. Like I see it, the more people I talk to, my age and younger, that idea never rears its head. This idea of boundaries, standards, a code doesn't happen for anyone 30 and below. Not in the conversations that I have. I think that's a really crazy thing to kind of come to grips with.
Yeah. You know, there's a book out now. I haven't read it. My buddy's read it. It's called The Coddling of the American Mind. And like one of the themes in the book is that when I was a kid, so when I was, 13, 14 years, 15 years old, the girls that were my age were like babysitters. They were like nannies. That's what they did. They went to school, they're freshman, sophomore, and then like at night, they would watch somebody's kids for a couple of hours. They would get paid to like watch some kids. Today's generation, the 14 and 15-year-olds have babysitters. So there's been a big shift in the way, there's been a big shift in the way I think people, lack of accountability. Like it ties into what you're saying right now. It's like kind of blame the world. Nothing's my fault. And like I learned like a long time ago. I've been a self-improvement junkie my whole life. Like I used to listen to Tony Robbins stuff first in my CD player. Like I had a disc, like a mobile disc player, like a Discman. And then it was, from that, it was like my iPod. Right now it's all on the phone. But like when I had my city job, I used to take the train an hour to work and an hour back. And I used to listen to all kinds of self-improvement stuff, read self-improvement books. I would go to Barnes and Noble on my lunch hour and read self-improvement books. And like one theme that I learned like a very, very long time ago is take responsibility for everything, even if you feel like it's not your fault. Because when you do that, even if it's not your fault, you put yourself in a position of control instead of this position where you don't have control, right? Because the minute you start blaming everybody else and extenuating circumstances, you relinquish any kind of control you have over your life. And so that's just a habit that I've gotten into over the past probably 10 or 20 years. But Todd is, in my interactions with him and in things that I've seen, communications that I've seen him have with other people, that guy lives by a code, man. And he's got a set of standards that he will not deviate from. And his thing is always do the right thing. Like, you know, we have situations that might happen in the business where maybe somebody was promised something that they shouldn't have gotten, or maybe what they're supposed to get was miscommunicated. And he's always like, what's the right thing to do? Whatever that is, do that. Do the right thing, right? He's not motivated by money. I mean, he's a marketer and he's a businessman, right? So every marketer and businessman is motivated by money to some degree, but he's not like, he's one of these guys that will turn down if he doesn't believe that we can help you, and he doesn't believe that we're the right fit for you. He will not work with you no matter how much money you throw at him. And if somehow you do slip through the cracks and you're not the right person, and it's nothing against the person, just sometimes it's just not the right fit. He'll give you your money back and say, well, give that person their money back. And, you know, unfortunately, we can't help them. You know, or if you buy coaching with like the last $10,000 you have in your savings account, he'll say you got to give that person their money back. And they need to be in a little bit of a better financial position before we can work with them. That's just the way he is, man. He does the right thing all of the time.
Yeah. So there is the sort of underlying like theme in a lot of the questions that I've been asking, not necessarily about Todd, but about the right thing. Like you said, you know, take responsibility. You said, I knew I was doing wrong. I can't say I didn't know, because I did know after a week or two, I knew. And whenever you owned up to that. So one of the things that just came up. So this Monday, I did like my second little long form Monday musings hour, and almost the entire theme was about this one conversation I had with a guy at a bachelor party. And what's cool about the bachelor party thing is when you do a bachelor party, you're hanging out with a group of people who are brought together by this one like hub spoke. So all these people, all these different spokes are surrounding this one hub. Probably would never cross paths, probably would never mingle, right? And I could just tell I was with people who weren't marketers, weren't entrepreneurs. And I just had like this, like, it was a brief conversation, but I ranted about it for an hour for like the theme that I took from it. The theme was basically like people getting exploited at work, and they feel like I guess he felt trapped. And so I was like, well, you know, let's talk about this. I was like, well, the first thing is like, I'm like, first off, if you're that miserable at work, perhaps, you know, that cliche rings a little true. If you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. I know it's cliche, but there's some truth to it. Like, life is struggle. So you need to like enjoy the because you have to work. Life is work. And I mean, that's not a cultural, like, that's not just an American thing. Like, everybody works, so make the choice to do something that isn't making you miserable. And then he rebuts that, well, if I enjoy it, then I have to work weekends because they'll see that I'm good at it and I enjoy it and they're going to exploit me. And I was like, well, that's not a them issue either. That's a you issue. You need to set boundaries and say, that's 2 Saturdays in a row, Jeff. I'm not coming in next Saturday. No way. And he said, well, you can't just do that. And I'm like, yes, you can. That's your job to set boundaries. That's your job. His job is to get you to work. Your job is to say, that's while I'm going to work. And he just rejected this. And then this shit drives me nuts. Someone told me it was my privilege talking. We were all white guys, all white men, college educated. And someone told me it was my privilege. And so I was like, have you read 50 Cent's book? I was like, what the fuck are you saying right now? Like, what are you talking about? So that's when I cut the conversation. I was like, we're at an impasse. I can't. I was like, dude, yeah. I can't fathom this idea that you have absolutely no choice or control in your life whatsoever. It's bonkers to me. So I want to like reiterate that point because I just feel like it's so top of mind. That's one of the things that I don't know if you had something to say on that. I'll let you say something if you had something.
No, man, I get it. I totally understand what you're saying, man. It's just all that really is just like lack of accountability. That's all it is, man. It's
Yeah.
just lack of
And
accountability.
yeah, I'm interested in this whole like take responsibility for everything. There's a couple things that I've always felt were really good, like kind of like virtues or like good code or rules to live by. Taking responsibility. I got that from Jocko Willink in Extreme Ownership, which Joe Schrieffer basically forced down our throats at Copy Camp. He loves Jocko. He loves that book. He loves SEALs and all that stuff. So that was a book like he was jumping up and down we had to read. So I read that one a couple times, and I really did start to embody that stuff. And then I got into stoicism. And so I started like trying to develop like this moral principle and codes. And you said, Todd says, do the right thing always. Now I'm having a crisis of faith, I got to admit. And I've kind of been like battling with my sort of commitment to stoicism even. And that is because this goes back to what I was trying to say earlier. And the whole reason I brought up NLP, and I'm still trying to get to that. We still have time. But I'm sort of seeing the world a little bit like unplugged, a little bit more of the world as it is. And so I stopped. Have you ever read 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene?
Yep.
All the way cover to cover?
Cover to cover.
Okay. I started to read it, and because it felt slimy to me, it felt manipulative, which is kind of what it is. Like it's a manipulation guide. And I stopped at like,
Yep.
I think I made it like chapter 5, maybe 6. And I was like, I just, it doesn't resonate with me. I don't want to be like this. I
Yep.
think that is naivete at play. That's me not seeing the world as it is. So that's where the crisis is coming in, where I'm like, I'm starting to see these things where should you always do the right thing? Like, is that what gets people ahead in the world? I feel like it's a safe bet. It's a thing that it's very dangerous to say out loud. Should you do the wrong thing? But then you see people push things like I'm going to speak specifically like the guy that kind of made me really think about all this was I'm going to call him Cobra Fate. You know what I'm talking about when I say Cobra Fate?
No.
Okay. Well, Andrew Tate. I'm seeing him come back on YouTube. He's not been banned. He's coming back on YouTube. I've seen more videos. You know what I'm talking about? His messaging and all that.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The way that he sort of pushed these limits and these boundaries, and then talk about like you said Wolf of Wall Street. That made me think about Jordan Belfort. People love a manipulator. Like they hate to get manipulated, but they worship manipulators, right? Like I'm just like starting to see the world for like two of the things that I'm trying to like say these are rock solid truths. Nice guys finish last, and life is struggle. Like those, I feel like I could bet my life on. So I'm looking for more principles to sort of live by. One sort of being the value thing that I said earlier are starting to come true. Like the world lives on value. You have to know what value is, which is like its own sort of Rubik's Cube to figure out. And so the reason I wanted to ask you, and I know I'm giving you a lot, maybe still you want to unpack some of this. The reason I keep coming back to NLP is like because I feel like NLP, I don't understand it. I don't know what it is. I've heard it for years. I know it's a powerful persuasion tool. I feel like if I could understand that a little bit more, I feel like NLP probably represents the world as it is, where it's not what you want or what you think you want. NLP just sort of makes things happen. Like persuasion makes things happen. Like people say, the sales copy feels slimy. No one would ever buy this. Bullshit. You're wrong.
Yeah.
This is what makes people do shit.
So let me start by saying this. When I read that book the first time, so that book was introduced to me 18 years ago. I worked in one of the fitness clubs that I worked at. One of the guys had it on his desk, and I was like, "What?" He was like the personal training manager. He ran like the whole personal training department, and he had this book on his desk, and I was like, "What is that?" And he told me what it was, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's interesting." And so that was like the first time I was like introduced to that book, right? So then I bought it probably a few years later, and I went through the exact same thing that you're talking about. I was going through that book, and I was like, this book does not coincide with like my worldview and like the way I want to live and what I think is right. And it's totally against like my kind of moral compass. And I did the same thing. I put it down and I put it on the shelf for years. The only reason why I read it again, I read it for two reasons. Number one is I'm trying to get into this habit of opening up my perspective to see and expose myself to other things that I might not necessarily agree with, but finish it and see it through to the end before I make a complete decision about it or formulate a certain opinion about it, right? And the second thing was I wanted to learn it from a protection perspective. And so, believe it or not, that book I mentioned before, Influence, the Science of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini, he actually didn't write that book from the perspective of how to persuade people. It's how to protect yourself from being persuaded by people. So there are actually two groups of people in that world. There are the people that want to learn all the slimy, sleazy shit so they can manipulate people. And then there's people that want to learn what that's about so they can protect themselves from being manipulated, right? So NLP, so that's basically why I read that book. And plus, you know what I found intriguing about the book that I didn't find intriguing the first time? So first of all, when I first read the book, I was reading it. And then when I finished it, I listened to it, the audio version of the book. When I was reading it, I couldn't get into the stories. They were like too confusing for me because you have to pay really close attention to the stories because there's a lot of terminology in those stories that's not really applicable today, like people's names and the locations that they're at. They're in these weird places and everybody's got these weird names. And so trying to pay attention to like who's who in the story was too difficult for me when I was reading it. Because again, I would be reading it like on the bus and I'm thinking about something else and I'm distracted. When I listened to it, I found the stories interesting. Like when he tells the story of like this one king that like tried to overthrow another king and what his strategy was to do it. I found that more interesting than like the actual technique that he was teaching in the book. Right. So that's my little rant about that book. NLP. So NLP is really what Tony Robbins uses. He just doesn't call it NLP. But NLP is this body of knowledge that was created by these two guys, John Grinder and Richard Bandler, in the 1970s. One of them was a linguistics major, and the other guy, I think, was a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but definitely a mind guy. And basically what they wanted to do was they wanted to come up with a system of communication, a system really of achieving excellence in life by understanding thoughts, behaviors, beliefs, why we have them, why we do the things that we do, how viewpoints are created, how beliefs are created. And so now there's like all sorts of like certifications you can get from accredited NLP institutions. You could become an NLP practitioner, a master NLP practitioner, an NLP coaching practitioner, an NLP trainer. John Grinder's most prized NLP student is Tony Robbins. And Tony Robbins doesn't have any NLP certifications. He just learned the principles of NLP and used them to help people achieve greatness in life, right? And so there are some principles to NLP that I just think are super helpful. Like one is that there's this principle that the map is not the territory. And so what that means in a nutshell is that every one of us has a different view of the world, right? So the map, the mental map that you have in your mind, right, represents a different reality than the mental map that I have in my mind, right? So the same way, if you look at a location, a geographical location on a navigation system or on a GPS, what you're seeing on that navigation system is going to look radically different than what the physical location looks like when you actually get there. That's just a representation of what that is. Well, the reality is that we all have different representations of reality. Like they say, if you show an apple to 20 people, each one of them will perceive it slightly differently. And an apple is a super objective thing. Like we all know what it looks like. Most of us know what it tastes like. We know what it feels like. We know what it feels like when we bite into one. But yet, every one of us perceives that experience slightly differently. So you can imagine how differently people experience more subjective things, right? That aren't so clear cut. And so like, that's an important thing to know in life. It's an important thing to know that people see the world differently. And you kind of have to uncover what their mental maps are when you communicate with them, so that you can communicate with them in a way that they can understand, right? Another principle is like, there's no failure, there's only feedback, right? So like, every time you do something in life, regardless of what it is, you're going to get a result from it. The result is either going to be favorable or non-favorable, but all that is feedback for you to then take and learn what to do or what not to do next, right? Not place a label on it and be like, oh, I suck, I'm terrible, I'm a failure, I can't do anything right. No, you tried something, it didn't work. Now, what did you learn from it? And now what can you try instead next time? Another one is like, most of the time people think that what they're doing is beneficial to them. So like, you might have a family member that's an alcoholic, or is in an abusive relationship, or is a drug addict. And to you, what they do is like, you can't fathom how they behave the way that they do, but in their mind, they're doing the best that they can. They're not looking at it and saying like, oh, I'm destroying myself, or I'm ruining my life. They have some sort of another viewpoint on it where they're justifying it in some way and saying like, my life isn't so bad, right? Whereas in your mind, you're like, what they're doing is ludicrous. The way that they're living is crazy. But they're not seeing it that way. They're not thinking, oh, my life is crazy and deal with it. They might say that, but truthfully in their heart, they don't believe that. Most people, unless they're like clinically insane, they think that whatever they're doing, no matter how negative it might be, isn't so bad for them.
And how does Tony Robbins use this to take over the world?
Good question. So it's about what he does with people is asking tons of the right questions to understand and uncover why a person thinks and behaves the way that they do, and then help them to install different beliefs and behaviors that take them to the next level in their life. He's just really good at getting to that deep core stuff that's inside of you by asking the right questions, by reframing the way you see things, by helping you shift your perspective on something. And now, he's to the point where he's so successful and he has such a reputation that I think a lot of his success now is just being in his presence. If he says something to you, you'll believe it. Like if Tony Robbins told you, Kyle, like you're the best copywriter I've ever met, like you should be a billionaire in the next 5 years, you probably will be, because you'll just believe that so wholeheartedly because it came from that source.
Yeah.
You know
So,
what I mean?
yeah. So when you are saying, he knows what questions to ask, there's two questions that come to my mind. The first question is, well, what are the questions? Because the questions seem like the secret to the universe. The second question I'd have is like, how do you know that? Have you like been to a Tony Robbins event? Have you maybe read? You said you used to listen to him on your iPod and stuff like that. Like, where'd you pick up this knowledge about how Tony uses NLP?
So first was the terminology. He was using a lot of the NLP terminology in his early, like Awaken the Giant Within and Awaken the Giant Within, and then like Unlimited Power. Like he was using a lot of NLP terminology in those audio recordings. And then just from research that I did on NLP and on him, and I learned that basically he learned a lot of the principles, and he was just willing to like go out and like, I remember like there's a story of him like learning a bunch of techniques, like going up to people randomly and like trying to work with them, and like somebody saying to him like, you're not a psychologist or you're not licensed, you're not certified. And he's like, I don't have to be certified, I just want to help people. He just didn't give a shit.
That's
he just didn't give a shit.
Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins was a self-help pickup artist. Like he was just a day gaming people in the street, like just walking up, like dropping his lines, running his routines. So you said you were doing research on NLP, and do you have like a sort of NLP Bible of sorts? Like this has got the most concentrated and best information about NLP.
Yeah, I have a book. Hold on a second. I'll tell you the name of it.
And I'll write it down. I saw a guy, he's talking about Tony Robbins. I don't remember any of the content of this video except for the one joke he made. Oh yeah, he left a Tony Robbins event. And it was Noah Kagan, the AppSumo guy. He said, "Here's why I left a Tony Robbins event after the first day or second day." He said, I went in there, I had an open mind. I saw Tony Robbins do that scary clap he does with his open hands, and they like showed it. Like, Tony Robbins, when he claps, it's really weird.
Yes, I've seen that.
That shit had me bugging. It's like I never thought of that.
I've actually heard multiple people talk about that.
And it's like,
you're not the first. So this book, NLP, The Essential Guide.
It's right there in the title.
Book, this book was written by this guy, Tom Hubiar. I think he passed away like recently in the past like 2 or 3 years, but I felt like that book was written in very simple language, makes concepts very easy to understand.
And
so like there are some so part of what Bandler and Grinder did was they studied expert communicators, and there were 3 mainly that they studied, and one of them was this guy Milton Erickson. So this guy Milton Erickson is like one of the greatest hypnotists to ever live. This guy basically cured himself of polio as a kid through hypnotic suggestion, and so Erickson had an ultra high success rate with his clients, and Bandler and Grinder wanted to study him and see like what does he do differently than like most hypnotists do? Like how is he able to create these changes in people? And so like one of the things that they noticed is that Erickson was extremely indirect when he would make hypnotic commands. So instead of using direct language and like telling a person you're going to do this or you're going to experience that or you're going to feel this way, he would ask indirect questions to get the person to feel that way on their own. Okay. And so what they came up with is this model of communication called the Milton model. Okay. Then they also came up with something called the meta model, which is the inverse of that. And both of them are applicable in NLP. So what's the difference? The difference between them is one uses extremely vague, indirect language to get the person that you're speaking to speak more, to think in a different way. And one of them asks very specific questions to get very specific answers. So I'll give you an example. 3 things that NLP has identified that we do are deletions, distortions, and damn, I forget what the third one is. I'll come back to it. So generalizations.
Some form of like, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's deletion, distortion, and generalization. So what that means is that we filter experiences in our lives through those 3 things to make sense of the world. So I'll give you an example. Let's say I call you up and I need your help with something, right? Like maybe I need you to look at a headline for me or something like that. And I call you up and I'm like, "Hey Kyle, man, look, I got this headline. I'm trying to write it. I could really use some help." And you're like, "Yo, man, I can't talk right now. I gotta go. I'll talk to you later." And you hang up in my face, right? And so now I look at that situation and I start to formulate an opinion or a belief on it, right? And I'm like, damn, this fucking guy Kyle's a scumbag. Like, I called him up to ask him a question. I needed his help with something. The guy blew me off, right? But maybe the full context of that, or maybe I say, damn, I called Kyle to ask him for some help, and the guy blew me off. Like, you can't rely on anybody. Like, everybody's a scumbag, right? And maybe the reality is that the full context of that situation was, maybe I called you and you just got into a fucking car accident. Right? Or maybe you told me, maybe you got into an accident the day before and now you're like in court or something for that. And I called you. So now what I did was I distorted the experience to make me sound like the victim, right? By deleting that information about the accident, right? Like maybe I knew about the accident happening and I completely deleted it from the experience because I want to label you a scumbag. And then I generalize that by saying everybody's a scumbag. So deletion, distortion, and generalization. So lots of times when people communicate, they'll use deletions, distortions, and generalizations. And what you use in these NLP models are ways to get clear on them. So when someone says, no one ever listens to me, who specifically doesn't listen to you? Why don't they listen to you? Why do you feel that they don't listen to you? How did you formulate that opinion? Can you give me an example? Right? That's the way you use the meta model to be able to understand people. The way you use the Milton model is to actually use generalizations to create rapport with people. So if someone says, you know what, man, I called my friend up yesterday and he blew me off. He just didn't want to give me the time of day. And I said, people are scumbags. Me making that generalization back to you forms some sort of rapport because you're like, you agree with that. You can identify with that. So there are ways of communicating with people using NLP to create connections and rapport with them, if that makes sense. Okay. I know I ran a little bit there.
I think I get it. Like you're saying, someone gives you a specific and you generalize in agreement back to them. So something that I'm sort of, did we define NLP? I mean, it's neuro-linguistic programming, right? Yep. So what I've found kind of interesting as I'm listening to you is the way that I thought it works, which I thought was like, you rub your belly, tap your head, and then someone's under your spell or something. I think I saw a video you talking about from like your chest plane, from your belly plane, like where you speak. I feel like that was an NLP video of sorts. So what is like the purpose of NLP?
The purpose of NLP is really, I call it like a blueprint to the human mind. It's a way of understanding how people think and behave and how they formulate opinions, beliefs, and values so that you can understand them better. Now, then there's the whole communication aspect of that, right? So you can use that information like Tony Robbins uses it to help propel people, right? So it all comes down to communication. He's using that to communicate with them in such a way that they shift their perspective and they see things differently. There's a persuasion aspect to that. But his version of persuading them is persuading them to become a better person. There are also ways that you can use it to persuade others to comply with you, right? Or to do certain things that you want them to do. What I was talking about that in that video had more to do with body language, like reading body language and communicating body language. So body language, it's, all kinds of science points to the fact that as much as 93% of our communication takes place non-verbally. It takes place through body language. Now, why is that? That's because body language is the oldest form of communication. If we go back millions of years ago, before there was verbal language, the first humans, whatever they were, Neanderthals, whatever they communicated with body language, right? They communicated with signs and sounds, right? Not necessarily speaking. There was no language. There were no words. That came much later. So this idea of reading body language and projecting body language is still very much deeply ingrained in that old reptilian part of our brain. So when we communicate with people, whether you realize it or not, you're sending messages based on what you do with your body language. And you're also picking up on things that other people are doing with their body language. So I think the example that I gave in that video is, if you want to demonstrate that you know what you're talking about, you should be gesturing from the chest plane, from this area. Okay.
You call it the passion plane. The passion plane. You're
passion plane. About it. Correct. Now, I happen to do that naturally. Like, I just talk with my hands. If you want to signify trust, you should gesture from like the navel area, like down below here, right?
How does one gesture from the navel area, like hands, like, I don't understand, like, where, just, like down here, like
yeah, just a little bit lower than your chest.
Okay.
Right. One thing that you shouldn't do is use closed body language. So closed body language is like when you cross your arms. So why is that not good? Because what you're doing is you're protecting your vital organs. You're protecting the heart, the lungs, and the stomach. Now, some people say, that's crazy. You know, I cross my arms all the time. It's just something that I do. Look, I do it too, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm being defensive, but what's happening is you are, whether you realize it or not, you're conveying that message subconsciously that you are being defensive. So the way that I tell people is like, think about the most relaxed, vulnerable situation you could put yourself in. Maybe it's getting a massage. Maybe it's you're in bed with a chick or a guy or whatever your thing is. If you were having sex with somebody, would you have your arms crossed? No. You know what I'm saying? Like, you'd be totally relaxed and chill. Like, you wouldn't have your arms crossed in that situation, right? It's not a natural thing to do.
A lot of people think what their arms would be up to. Crossing them is not on the list.
Yeah. So if that's not something you would do, and that's why wouldn't you do it? Because it's not conducive to that state that you're in, right?
It's not conducive at all.
Exactly.
Oh man. Okay, I get what you're saying. It was. I like where you took it. That's
totally the best example I could give.
Yeah, that's a good one. You're from Brooklyn, right?
From Brooklyn, yeah.
Yeah. Someone asked if you were from Long Island. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like a 12-year-old with some of the jokes running through my head right now. Okay, so I get that. Here's something that is interesting to me. Again, this comes all back to like, I like this idea of body language. I feel like I've always had pretty good body language in that I almost have dominant body language, I would say. Like, it's almost too aggressive. I feel like it's off-putting. It's too forward. It's too much. Some of the stuff, like, I was talking, so on my first podcast, I was talking to Braddock, and Braddock asked me if I had read the book, The Mystery Method. And I had not. Do you know The Mystery Method, the pickup book?
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I had never read it, but he said that I should read it. So I read it. And the stuff in there, the way that this dude says, like, how you pick up girls, there's these things, demonstrate higher value. These terms that have probably been passed, they've been around long enough now. Everyone basically knows what a neg is. You know what a neg is, right?
No.
Okay. Well, so a neg is simply like a sort of, it's a comment that's not a direct insult, but it sort of lowers the other person's value.
Okay.
It's like, just like the example was like, oh, nice nails. Are they real? And they're obviously fake. So like, that's a little neg. It's just like a little jab. It's not an insult. It's a little jab. So in this whole dance, the mystery method, it's like this sort of teetering tottering of, it's like a game of, it all comes down to value. This is something that I mentioned, like I touched on a little while ago. Like, the world is run by value. I'm starting to see, if you call Nesby value emotions instead of, persuasion emotions, you call them value drivers like Alex Hormozy does. And then that context, well, sales runs on demonstrating value. And then mystery method is all about demonstrating value. So I'm coming to this concept like, oh shit, everything is just value. So when we're talking about crossing arms, and you don't want to do this, I feel like all of the communication zeitgeist and self-help and all this stuff is all about rapport building. And then I read this book, The Mystery Method, and it's like about this value struggle, but also breaking rapport to show that like this is I have two paradigms that I'm locking into. Like I'm going to hold on to these things like pit bull clinch. And that's like nice guys finish last and life is struggle. And the nice guys finish last paradigm is like anybody who's needy automatically loses. It's not about being mean. It's not about being mean. It's like I told that one guy, like it's about setting boundaries. Don't be a doormat. Like those people don't get ahead. You see the people like, again, this is inspired by stuff that I see in like Andrew Tate and his rise, like his meteoric rise. Like that didn't happen because he was just outrageous. That happened because a lot of people jumped on board. They had to. And they were just like, I'm with this guy. And again, he's not a doormat. So, you know, when it comes to like all the stuff I read about how to be a good communicator and how to do this and how to do that, I feel like, and this is again my gripe with Stoicism, is that it tends, when you take it as like absolute gospel, you do end up trending towards the nice guy paradigm. We are always seeking rapport. You don't want to offend anybody. You don't want to have off-putting body language. You don't want to raise your voice. You don't want to. But then, that's the map. But I feel like the actual terrain. What'd you call it? The map versus the what?
Territory.
The territory. I feel like the actual territory is being an asshole to a degree, being a little off-putting, being a little bit
douchey.
Chad is what they call it now. Chad is the woke version of douchebag, so it doesn't offend anyone. So yeah, you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense to you? Like, you know, can those two things be reconciled? Like having good body language, but also like winning the game of life requires you to be a little bit douchey.
Yeah. So it all boils down to the context, environment, and circumstance, because that all of those things drastically impact what you should and shouldn't do, right? So first of all, the context of that pickup book that you're talking about is completely different than most of like what I teach. I'm not a pickup guy. I've never been that guy, right? Even like when I was single, like I've never been that dude to like walk up to a chick in a bar and like scoop her up. All the girls that I ever got were like, I mean, yeah, I've had that happen before, but more through like it kind of happened organically, not me going up to a chick in a bar with like this whole shtick and like picking her up.
Like friends of friends.
Right. Friends of friends. Or like if I worked with a girl, like the girls that I always got were like the ones where I could be around them for an extended length of time, because then they would get to know me and I could make them laugh, and then boom, then I got them. Right. So I need like more time. Back when I was single, I needed more time to like land those types of girls. Right. Yeah. So I've never been a pickup guy. And so what those guys teach is different than like the kind of rapport that I teach. Right. Like when I talk to people about creating rapport, it's more in like the sales scenario or the sales environment, or when you're communicating with someone and it's a business type of transaction, right? Like it's more along that context as opposed to what those guys teach. Now, what plays into what those guys teach is the scarcity principle, because as something becomes less available, people tend to want it more. That's especially true when it comes to relationships, right? Like we see this all the time. Two people meet, they get their phone number, they're texting back and forth, everything's cool. All of a sudden, one person goes AWOL. What happens? The other person starts chasing them. Why are they not getting back to me? What happened? What, I thought we were supposed, right? And as that person becomes less available, they simultaneously become more desirable. So if you can mix a little bit of that into this pickup method approach, I could see that where you do a little bit of a jab. So it's kind of like you're friendly, but you're not desperate. I get that. I totally get that. And look, there are also times where I have. So again, it all depends on context, environment, circumstance. So for example, standing, if you're in a room full of people, guys, let's say, and you have your arms crossed, right?
Mhm.
That could be interpreted as a sign of being defensive. Okay. But if you wanted to walk into that room and let everybody know that you don't give a fuck and you're like letting yourself out there and you're totally vulnerable because you're not worried about anybody in the room, you could do the complete opposite, which is put your hands behind your back. Because that's the message that sends. Like, I'm not worried about anything. I'm good. I'm here. I'm good, and I'm not worried about anybody in this room, right?
Mhm.
But if that's the message that you want to send, then go for it. But in certain contexts, people could look at that and be like, "This guy's an idiot," or "He's like thinks who he is," and they could frown upon that. So you have to like know what's the context, environment, circumstance. Like, what is your overall goal here? Like, what are you trying to do? And how do you think the people around you are going to perceive what you're doing?
Yeah. I think what it comes down to, I think it's a bit of when you talk about value in like the dating marketplace, I guess, or like this pickup thing or the bars. I agree with you that, you know, I've had I've had one-nighters, but I've also had like other things that and in the mystery method book he says there's a rule of like it's like 7 hours or 10 hours or something, like takes 4 to 10 hours. He's like a very nerdy guy. He's got like a rubric for this, and it's like he says basically it takes like an average of 7 hours for someone to have enough comfort. My anecdotal experience is that's pretty accurate, actually. It's kind of crazy. So you're talking about, have enough time to like get to know each other, and she can see that you're funny. And you say, what's your goal? I think ultimately this whole value thing, another word that could be substituted is it's about kind of respect. I think I've seen, like, I saw someone say it somewhere. It's like men love women and women respect their man or something like that. Like, it's like there's a lot of people that are just saying like it's not the same for both genders and both sexes, the way that they love each other. It's like if you fall off as a man, your woman's not far behind, like being out the door is basically the messaging there. And so when we talk about like what's the goal, I don't think is to get the girl. I think the goal is to be a well, another popular term now is high value man. Like that shit's been thrown around a lot now. And what's a high value man? Just another word for respect. Just a dude who gets respect, right? So when it comes down to NLP, what's the message that you want to convey? Is you could take it to like a violent route and say like I'm not a man to be trifled with. I'm not a man to be fucked with. But I think ultimately what you want to do is just say I'm a man to be respected. And that can translate to a sale. I mean, especially if it's in-person sales. If you're selling a helicopter, something like a yacht, you want to have like a respectable sort of disposition, right?
Yeah. Well, again, it all depends on the context, environment, and the circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I train Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. January will be 10 years that I've been training. And what I love about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is that there's a belt ranking system. So first of all, and this is not to shit on any other kind of martial art, but
Sure,
it's very difficult to become a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. So on average, it takes 10 years. So it's not like Taekwondo where your little 10-year-old kid is a black belt, right? It takes a long time.
Not to shit on these ridiculous martial arts.
I mean, I'm just, and so, hey, look, there's a reason why when you watch a UFC fight, right? When you watch real fighting, those guys have to be skilled in certain skill sets, certain martial arts they have to be skilled in, but there are a few that are like basically essential. So they have to know how to strike. So that could be either kicking, boxing, Muay Thai, where you're using limbs, you're using elbows and knees, some sort of karate, right? They have to be skilled in grappling, either wrestling or Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or both, right? So why is that? It's because that's what works. That's what's effective, right?
Mm.
And so it's very difficult to become a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And there's only 5 belts. You got white, blue, purple, brown, and black, right? So you only got 5 belts in there. On average, it takes 10 years. So what I love about Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is that when everyone's in the academy and they all have their belts on, you can kind of pick up on a story about that person immediately by their belt color. Like if you see a black belt in Brazil, if a black belt comes in the room, you know this guy either is really good or he's been training a long ass time and paid his dues. And most likely it's both. It's both of those things, right? So if a black belt comes into my academy, I'm going to communicate, and I'm a 4-stripe purple belt. So my next belt is brown belt, right? When I communicate with that guy, I'm going to carry myself in such a way where I want him to understand that I respect him. Because in that context and in that environment, he's way more advanced than I am. He's put in more time than I have. He's got way more experience and wisdom than I do. And he has more to offer me than I have to offer him in that value exchange that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, value.
But if that same black belt came into my office and wanted help with copywriting, our roles are going to shift. Now I'm the fucking alpha. I'm the one in charge now. Now I know more about this than you. I've got the wisdoms on my side. The experience is on my side. The value is on my side. Now, that's not to say that I treat you like an asshole, but I'm going to carry myself differently than I do in that other environment and situation.
Yeah, that's a real point. I was thinking about this, like, I haven't been to like very many marketing conferences and basically since the pandemic. But yeah, like whenever, say I go to the bar, it doesn't matter if I make 7 figures or $7. Like I can't like wear like a stapled like post-it to my head about how much money's in my bank account. And there's probably just a couple other dudes and not very far away who's make that much down here in South Florida. It's there's the value prop there. It becomes a lot different, right? Like but then if I go to like one of these marketing events or some specifically copywriting, I went to a marketing event where no one knew who the fuck I was. But if I go to a copywriting one, you know, I get to feel like a little bit of a celebrity because the YouTube channel, like people know my name before I walk in the door. There's one other place that there's a strong value prop. I went to Peru like 4 weeks ago, and I was like the only gringo in the bar. And boy, I was a little celebrity for that night. That was a wild night. It was wild, man. They like the white dudes out there. So
yeah,
but yeah, I get what you're saying. So like, it depends on. You're saying it depends on the context.
yeah.
Let me ask you this, because this is something you said earlier, and I like staying on this theme. I feel like I like your thoughts on these topics, and your this is your zone, so I want to stay in them. But like, we were talking about, you know, this dude with the NLP stuff, like cures himself of polio. I remember you said that. I wrote it down. And I remember this about, like, you were talking about Tony Robbins, like knows how to ask the right questions. Something I wonder is, like, can these things really have a lasting impact? If you have, like, that goes back to the Joe Vitale thing. If you have these conflicting beliefs, if you have these limiting beliefs that are deep rooted in your brain, that you're not good enough, you know, your permanent imposter syndrome, can someone really talk you into believing in yourself and subvert those very deep rooted like worldviews? Like, I don't know. That's something I'm curious about.
I don't know, man. I don't know the answer to that question. Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't think anybody can be. I certainly think that it's possible. I've seen it, but to say that like anybody who's got, because there could be other things there. There could be like depression. There could be a chemical imbalance, right? And like positive self-talk alone sometimes is just not enough for somebody who's got real serious issues with depression and anxiety and things like that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And so coming back from that, because like again, you've caught me at a real meditation kick phase in my life. Like I've been reading up on it. I read this book, Letting Go by David Hawkins. I read Feeding Your Demons by, I forget the name of the author. I read Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. And then I read the
Yep.
Ho'oponopono book. Okay, so there's one that we can rap about a little bit, because Joe Dispenza talks a lot about, this kind of goes back to that polio thing. I forget the guy you talking about with him, but like Joe says, this, you can almost link this to like the idea of chemical imbalances and depression, that your emotions emit chemicals, right? Like if you're angry, you're getting like a burst of cortisol.
Yeah, 100%.
So you can you can get addicted to these chemical bursts, and so you start seeking out these emotions. Your body gets addicted.
Yep.
It's crazy because, like, if you really think about it after reading that book, I drew this conclusion myself. Your body's just an addiction machine. It's a habit machine. It just wants homeostasis, even if it's terrible, even if it's like a terrible state of being. It just wants homeostasis. So yeah, he's saying like, you get addicted to these really bad things, and it shortens your life cycle. And it sounds in a lot of ways like sort of a precursor to the chemical state of things like depression. And what's really cool about the stuff that because I actually did, he has these guided meditations, and he gives us a little plan at the back of the book. And I did it for the second day in a row, like the week 2 meditation of it. But he talks about, first thing you've got to do is sort of unmemorize, because they're like addictions, they're like memories, unmemorize the bad things. And you said, positive self-talk. And something that I really liked about Joe and his message is you can't positive self-talk your way through. It's like trying to outrun a bad diet. Like you could run 30 miles a day. If you have a shitty diet, you're still going to be out of shape. Like you can't outrun a bad diet. You can't just talk through if you have terrible memorized emotions and mindset.
Yep.
Did you like, I know you read the book obviously, but like, did you try to implement any of that stuff at the back, the meditations, or did you go deep on that?
I didn't.
Well, what made you read the book?
How did I come across Joe Dispenza? I might have saw him on somebody else's YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
And then I looked up his books on Amazon, and the amount of reviews that he's got like 10 or 20,000 reviews on that book. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I started reading it, and what I liked about that book was, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, like that, the proof points and the logical explanations and justifications for like why he says the thing. So the things that he says in that book, everybody says them, but he gives like in-depth, granular explanations as to why and how these things work the way that they do. Right. And I thought that way, he admits that his first book, he didn't do that.
Yeah.
And so that's why he made it his business to do it in that book. Sadly, I didn't finish that book. I need to finish it. It's on my list of books to finish. I do that, by the way. I am notorious for starting stuff and not finishing it.
I feel like Audible carries you to the finish line. That's what the benefit of Audible is if you hit play, it's going to get you there.
Yeah, you know what my problem is with Audible is that, and I'm getting better at it, is I'm learning to, when it's time for me to stop for the day, now for whatever reason that might be, maybe I have to do a call, maybe it's time to eat dinner, maybe I just don't want to listen anymore. I got to stop right when, like, at the end of the point being made and a new point is about to be made. Because I used to stop like in the middle of something, and then when I would turn it back on, I wouldn't know like what the fuck I was listening to. Like I'd be like, I didn't understand the context of what the person was saying, and then that would just kind of scramble my brain. So now I either try to start at a new chapter or when a new point is being made, and that kind of helps me stay on track.
I always hit the reverse 30 like 2 or 3 times whenever I'm starting the book back up. So it's like I know I'm gonna need some content. I call it like my little ramp up, so I can try to get my brain back. Like you're talking about, be unscrambled by the time we reach the point that I was actually stopping at, because I'm gonna be like, what the fuck were we talking about when I quit?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's cool about the Dispenza school of thought, and then a really woo-woo one is letting go. Letting Go was the first book that sort of put this idea of like the opposite of self-help, which is instead of like talking yourself up in the mirror with positivity. This is why I'm interested in like NLP too, because it's been around so long and it seems to be so powerful. And like you said, Tony Robbins gets people like stand on their head and make $1 million using it. So it's like, that seems pretty useful. This book, Letting Go, is basically like a whole, this guy, Dr. David Hawkins, wrote this book. He has a gazillion books, but this one's supposed to be like one of the more impactful ones. There's only one line in the book that describes the process for letting go, and then there's like 100 some odd pages. Just the rest of it sort of like just kind of talking about other stuff. The line in the book is how to let go. It says, basically, when you feel a negative emotion, just kind of feel for where it is in your body, and then just sort of like let it go. And the idea of letting go isn't like letting it go, releasing it. It means letting it be. And the whole call in the book is that as humans, we have all these different ways for dealing with negativity, and there's repression, suppression, and some sort of avoidance. I think it's like whatever the alcohol track is. So suppression is like we say, I'm not going to think about that. And you just say, fuck it, I'll deal with it later. And then repression is like wherever it was so bad, you don't even remember it. Like your subconscious said, get that out of here. Get rid of it. Don't ever think about it again. And then the other one is the avoidance one, which I forget what it's called. It's like, it's intoxication. It's drugs, it's alcohol, it's gambling, it's video games. It's distraction. I think distraction is the word. But the thing is, over time, emotions never leave. They bubble up. And then you have like this sort of boiling point where you're always at the risk of exploding over. This like people who have meltdowns and stuff. They cross that line, and then they have an outburst. Their pot bubbles over, and then it goes right back to sort of simmering at the top. And there's still all that left. You think you got it out, but all you did was get rid of the overflow. And so this book basically tells you that it's not about like pumping yourself full of joy and self-talk and all that stuff. It's actually about you're just carrying so much baggage that you don't know how to let go of. And so that's sort of like a track that I thought was really interesting. And I read all that book, but I felt like it was incomplete because like I can't just like decide I'm always going to feel my anger every time it arises and get myself into a healthier state. That's why I like Joe Dispenza's thing. Like, you got to get to the end, because the end's where he kind of gets like a little bit more about the how-to. Like the last third of the book, which is actually not that long. Like most of the book is like what you said, the why. It's an interesting read. But if you're looking to make like mental facility change, did you ever read Psycho-Cybernetics?
Probably 3 times.
Okay.
I just finished. I'm just starting it again.
I was thinking about I'm in between. I like to reread books like that. The one I'm thinking about going back to for like the 3rd or 4th time is Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi, I think his name is. You read that one, Never Eat Alone?
Yeah. Got an orange book cover.
Yeah. So as you can tell, I'm also a self-improvement junkie. And so I'm always like, what I like about these mental ones is like, ooh, well, the mental one's fascinating to me because it's an arena I haven't yet tackled. I've always just sort of been me. And I haven't ever considered like, well, maybe there's a different way to be. Like, maybe there's a better way to talk.
A different identity.
Yeah. You ever reinvented yourself, Paul?
Many times. Yeah. That's what Psycho-Cybernetics is really all about. It's about the self-image, right? It's about and look, Tony Robbins says the same thing. He goes, I wasn't born this Tony Robbins. He goes, I created this motherfucker. That's what he said. You know, and I think we change. Some of us change. You know, I have friends that are still doing the same thing they were doing when we were 17 years old, right? But there are those of us that like seek something better, a better version of ourselves. Yeah, we're constantly evolving. We're constantly that identity is constantly changing and morphing into something else based on experiences and wisdom that we gain in life, right?
So with you, like, one of the things I really want to see where this Joe Dispenza thing comes in. And I don't think I ever made the point I was trying to make like 30 minutes ago, that he was basically saying that if you can unlearn these negative emotions, like, because if they keep coming up, they're an addiction. All right. Your brain's addicted to chemicals. So the way I think about it, I'm going to tell a story. Do you mind if I tell a story?
Go right ahead, man.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to link it to like 10 books while I tell it. But yeah, so I'm going to actually start writing down some of these books because I always put them in the notes so people can read them. There's a book I read called The Way of the Superior Man. Have you ever read that one?
Yep. I know. I never read it. I know of it, though.
Okay. So The Way of the Superior Man is a very polar focus, like male, masculine, feminine polarities, right? And so he kind of talks about what it is to be the masculine polarity a lot. That's the whole point of the book. But he talks about being basically stoic, basically being like a rock, basically being unreactive. That's like the whole role of a man, just to be steadfast. And so I parlayed off of that into stoicism years and years and years later. I read a book called How to Think Like a Roman Emperor. That was my debut into stoicism. Blew my mind. I was like, this is epic. I gotta be this. And so
Marcus Aurelius.
Yep. It was written by a guy. It was a Scotchman. Oh my God. His name's like David something, I think. I know David Data wrote Way of Superior Man, but I also think some guy named David or something wrote the other one too. I can look it up. But yeah, it's a book about Marcus Aurelius. And, you know, he's a big Stoic figure. So I'm in fast forward months after years after reading The Way of Superior Man, maybe a year after reading How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, and I'm putting this stuff into practice. And I'm in the shower, and I wake up, I go to the gym, come home, take a shower, go to work. It's my routine every day. So I'm in my morning shower, and I'm having a shower rant. And so I start journaling and stuff because Stoics journaled. Marcus Aurelius obviously journaled, and the meditations wouldn't exist. So I'm journaling now because I'm Marcus Aurelius, right? So I'm writing down all this shit. And I start to recognize this pattern. Like every morning in the shower, I'm fucking pissed off. I'm like, all right, I'm going to start paying attention to what pisses me off and how I can be unreactive to it, how I can be a rock, how I can be a superior man. So I find myself in the shower, same time, like 9:30 in the morning. I can tie this all back to Joe Dispenza and the Breaking Habit of Being Yourself. That's when I'm gonna fucking like tie it all together. So I'm mad as shit about something my boss could probably do later. I'm like, I know what's gonna happen today. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna send this in. They're gonna kick it back from legal. I'm gonna go to him. He's gonna be a dickhead about it, and then I'm gonna fucking go do this. And then I was thinking, I gotta write this down. You know, I gotta put it in my journal so I remember I can try to record how I can be non-reactive to this shit. And then it hit me, and I was like, this hasn't even happened. This isn't even real. This doesn't even exist. And then I looked, and I was like, none of these problems exist. I just get angry at 9:30 in the morning. My body just has this habit. When I get back from the gym, I've got all this caffeine, I've got all this testosterone and dopamine or whatever I got going on. And this is the time to be angry. And I would find things to become, I would create narratives in my head to become angry about. And so what I like about Joe Dispenza's thing, this idea of breaking the habit of being yourself, that sort of resonated with me because I had like a prior experience in my life where I thought I was going to be a Stoic, and I was steeling myself against the forces of the world that would, compromise my Stoicism. And I realized nothing challenges me. Like 99% of my life, all these things are basically like weird, crazy narratives that I started to develop to get angry at 9:30 in the morning or whatever. And so that was like when I read it in Joe Dispenza's book, I was like, yeah, makes sense. I've been there. I've had to do that. Personal story.
Yeah, man. Listen, those little, we've all got rituals, right? It's just a matter of, are they serving you, or or are they not serving you? Right?
Mhm.
Like that's just, you know, everybody talks about this whole gratitude thing, right? Like wake up and start your day with gratitude. And I've been doing that for years. So like my little ritual is I wake up and I walk the dog. That's like the first thing I do every morning. And that's like my little prayer meditation. So I also pray every morning and every night. I used to have
Mhm.
nightmares when I was a kid. My grandmother was like, that's because you're not saying your prayers. Say your prayers, you won't have nightmares anymore. So I
Right.
got into this habit of I've been literally praying every morning and every night since as far back as I can remember. And it's the same prayer. I got the thing like memorized. Like I've tweaked it and added a few things to it over the years. But so I walk the dog and I say this little prayer, and in the prayer, I really don't ask for anything. It's
Mhm.
just more of being grateful and happy for the things that I have. And then I got like this little affirmation thing that I do where I tell myself, who I am and what I want to be and etc. But that's my routine, man. And then I have a similar thing like before I go to bed every night. And I feel like it's helped me tremendously,
Do you
you
do
know.
you do you think like something I worry about with like having? I know a lot of guys that actually have a very similar thing where they have like a thing that an affirmation or something they repeat morning and or night. Does it lose its edge? Does it lose its impact? Does it stop affecting you if it just becomes like rote memory at a point?
For me, it doesn't. I think everybody's different. Like people are affected by and react to things. Everybody reacts to things differently, right? Like I'll give you marijuana for an example. Like there are some people that cannot live without weed. Like smoking weed relaxes them. It helps them to focus. I've never been that guy, right? Like it's just not my thing. And there are plenty of people that are the same way. There are some people that like marijuana relaxes them. And there
Mhm.
are some people that it puts them into a complete state of anxiety. And the same is true of alcohol. The same is true of anything really. Like different things work for different people,
Yeah.
right? There are some people that like I've read about these people that go on the carnivore diet and all sorts of skin issues. One of the MMA fighters I follow, this guy Chad Mendez, he's a lightweight fighter in the UFC. Guy's a stud. I mean, he's built, he's shredded, he's a good-looking guy, he's an avid hunter, he's a successful guy. He showed pictures of what his legs looked like. He had extremely bad eczema on his legs. And just from going on a straight carnivore diet, no carbs, just eating organic meat, game meat that he catches, totally ridded him of his eczema. Right now, there are people out there that will tell you that the carnivore diet is the worst diet that you could be on, that you should be on a vegan diet. You should only be eating greens. And my point in telling you that is that different things work for different people, and
Mhm.
everybody's got a reason or a story that they tell themselves as to why that particular thing works for them. For me, it helps me to have that habit of just saying that prayer every day and saying these few things to myself that I want to believe are true, and that I want to believe that I'm living in such a way that is congruent to those things.
When you started doing that, I know that the prayer you said was to basically fend off the demons, to help you have sweeter dreams when you were young. As you got older and stuff, and you're saying these affirmations or sort of different things to yourself. Here's my question, because this comes back to like the other stuff we're talking about, like meditation stuff and the limiting beliefs. Like, if you're saying things, are you saying them because you want them to be true? Uh, you know, is it to help you overcome an aspect that you're struggling with, and you want to repeat this until it becomes reality, and therefore is summiting a limiting belief of some sort?
It's a balance, man. There's some of that in there, but it's like I just said, it's things that I believe. Look, like you can't, like we just talked about before, you can't affirm your way. Like I can't affirm my way to becoming a professional NBA basketball player, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't, that's not something I can affirm to myself every single day, right? Although I do believe that there are people out there that believe that kind of stuff. They believe that if they just tell themselves something every single day, that suddenly they'll wake up one day and they'll have a new reality, right? My thing is I try to tell myself things that are congruent with the actions that I'm taking every day, right? So am I putting value out there? So like at one point, like I would tell myself like, I'm the go-to expert when it comes to influence, persuasion, and communication strategies, right? Like I would just tell myself that every day, but like I have certain things to back that up. You know, I have 20,000 people on my YouTube channel, right? That's not because I'm so great. It's because I've been doing it for a long time. I started that channel in 2011 and I've been consistent with it. As of recently, I've been inconsistent with it, but my actions are what got me to that, right? I've created over 50 trainings and courses in some capacity or another, whether they're just short ebooks, mini courses, master classes, whatever you want to call them, right? It's not a dream that I had in my brain and now I'm just lying to myself and telling myself I'm going to be this person. I do the actions that I'm taking on a consistent basis back up this thing that I want to be or this goal that I want to achieve, right? And then so some of that starts out with something that I haven't achieved yet, right? Like I want to become a better marketer and I want to become a better teacher at marketing, right? And this is a world that opened up to me in the past year and a half working with Todd's company, right? It's helped me find a new kind of sense of purpose and identity for myself, but I'm not there yet. I'm not at his level yet, right? I still have a lot more to learn, but I'm getting there and I'm putting in the reps, right? That's the point. I'm putting in the reps so I can start to tell myself that I'm getting to a certain place because I've worked with a handful of people now, dozens of people, different types of businesses, and helped them and looked and analyzed all different types of businesses. I'm getting those reps in. My point is that I don't tell myself things that I want to achieve if my actions are not really backing those things up. Same thing with Jiu Jitsu. I told myself every day, I'm going to become a purple belt. I'm going to become a purple belt. But why? Because I trained 3 days a week consistently every single week for years. I did that. I put in the reps.
Speaking of BJJ, we have a question here from one Todd Brown. I'd like Paul to elaborate on when was the last time you choked someone out and what was your first thought when they went out?
So the beautiful thing about BJJ is that it's one of the few martial arts where you can spar at 100%. You can't do that with anything else. You can't box at 100%. You can't kick at 100%. But jiu-jitsu, you can go at 100%. And when you're ready to give up or a limb is about to break or somebody's about to go to sleep, you just tap and then you start all over again. So like the way like Rogan describes it, he's like, it's like the ultimate video game death match where it's you versus this guy and then one of you dies. And then when you tap, you just start all over again. Like the cycle just start, you both come back to life and you start all over again. So, I don't think I've put anybody to sleep. I have not put anybody to sleep because they've tapped and I've stopped, but I've been put to sleep. I've been put to sleep 2 or 3 times. So first time was there's this specific type of choke that we do in the gi. It's called a bow and arrow choke. Basically, you get behind a person, you put your hand in their collar, then you rotate your body so that you're across their body, and then your other hand goes on their pant leg. So you're choking them and pulling on their pant leg and extending your hips at the same time. And this is one of those very sneaky. So there are 2 types of chokes in jiu-jitsu. There are air chokes where you're crushing the windpipe, and then there are blood chokes where you're stopping the blood flow to the brain. The bow and arrow choke is a very sneaky choke, meaning that there are other chokes that feel much worse than the bow and arrow choke, and you can fight through them. So when the bow and arrow choke goes on, it goes on deceptively fast. So it's one of these things where you think you're good because other chokes feel worse in comparison, but then the next thing you know, you're asleep. So I had one of those put on me maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and the guy who put it on me actually didn't even know I went out. The owner of my school had to yell and say, like, bro, he's out. He's out. That's it. And so when somebody goes out, you grab them by their legs, you pick their legs up and try to get the blood flow going back to the brain. Most of the time when people wake up, they don't know where they are. So like I woke up and I saw the guy and I had a completely different context. I went back to the last place I was in with him, which was like a Buffalo Wild Wings or like a Miller's Ale House. We went to go watch the fights one night. So when I came to, I thought we were in Buffalo Wild Wings. And I was like, what are you going to get to eat? Like I said, to him, and he was like, then I came out of it.
That's scary. That's scary to have someone say some shit like that to you. I would freak out, man.
It's an experience. Yeah, it's an experience.
Yeah, Jiu-Jitsu is wild. I'm glad I'm on the same team as Paul. Me too. You see, I'm buttering him up. I brought him on the show, and if things go down, go get him, Paul.
Same here, Todd. Thank you.
Oh, man. So ultimately, that's pretty awesome, dude. I feel like I did a little bit of Muay Thai, and then I sprained my ankle on July 4th, and I still hurt. It still gets sore. I thought by now it'd be completely healed. So I stopped doing that because it's hard to do flying knees with a sprained ankle. But yeah, I agree with you. Like that makes a lot of sense about like you can't go 100% in that. Like you can barely go 50%. If someone hits you with an elbow, like that's
a problem.
Yeah, man. You can't be doing no 50, 60% on that, man.
I'll tell you what, jiu-jitsu for me is so much more, and anybody that's trained for any amount of time will tell you this. It's so much more than just a martial art, right? It's so much more. So first of all, it's a superpower. Like it's a true superpower. Like I have a guy in my school that I train with who's 150 pounds, who was bullied his entire life. He's a smart kid, very smart kid, like a borderline genius. He's like a pharmaceutical major or something like that. Who has a PhD in pharmacology or pharmaceuticals, whatever it is. Very, very smart kid. Was bullied his whole life. Was picked on his whole life. He joined. He's been doing it now for like 5 or 6 years. Now he's 150 pounds. I'm probably about 220 right now, 215. When he started, I was already a purple belt. So I already had 2 or 3 years of experience under me. And now he's caught up to me to where now when we train together, he taps me more than I tap him just because he's gotten so good and so technical. But you know what kind of effect this has had on this guy's like overall life? Like one of the guys that used to pick on him in school joined the academy like 2 years ago, and he rolled with my friend and he went home and never came back again. This is the same guy that threw him down a flight of stairs in high school, like literally kicked him down a flight of stairs, right? So it's a superpower. When you really know what you're doing, you now have the ability to control and subdue people in very tough situations. But taking that out of the equation, there's just so much more to it. You know, there's just so much more of a mental aspect to it. There's this saying like the mats don't lie. So it's like when two guys go to train with each other, the mats don't lie. Like it's not like other aspects of your life where you can BS your way out of things, or you can try to pretend that you're somebody that you're not. There's none of that. Who you are as a jiu-jitsu practitioner is exposed, and it's out there for everybody to see. There's no faking it till you make it. Like everything that happens is real, right? And you see like a lot of what happens in real life gets echoed on those mats, because there are certain guys that they won't roll with certain guys because of their ego. They don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want the other guy to get the better of them. So they choose a path of complacency where they roll with the same people over and over again, right? There's just a lot of what happens in real life gets reflected on those mats.
So I've got two things I'd love to share with the audience. So first, I'm not good at Muay Thai. I did 2 some odd months of lessons. I'm not good. I want that to be very clear. I'm not saying I'm good, but the mental aspect of it. So I would go to I am just stupid. I'll say that. Like I'm that. I would go to the advanced classes and then I would spar because I just kind of wanted to, I understood also from Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and my friends talking about it and hearing about it that the best thing you can do is get on the mat and just go get your ass whooped and blah, blah. So I was taking Muay Thai and I was like, well, I'm gonna go spar. So within a couple weeks, I have been struck in the face more times in a week or two than anyone had ever probably been hit in the face in their life. And because it was, sparring and it was during lessons, it wasn't hardcore, but I recognized what it felt like to be punched in the face. And I recognized it's not comfortable, but it's not actually a death sentence. Lots of people, when you're fighting, boxers get destroyed. It's wow, it's getting hit in the face isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Once you get hit in the face, that kind of becomes a truth. And so I remember one night I was out at a bar and I was standing beside this girl that I was out with. And she said, this dude bumped me again. I was like, again? She was like, yeah, this guy just keeps falling over over the back of her bar stool onto her. And I was like, oh, well, why didn't you say something? She was like, well, I thought he would stop. I was okay. So I just position myself. So I'm just standing directly behind her bar stool. And then he fell over on me. And when I did, I didn't turn around or anything. I was kind of I gave him one of these and I was and I turned, then I just looked after he came off of me and he turned around, he said, sorry about that. And I said, it's cool. And then something in his chemical makeup went haywire because seconds later he said, you know what? And I was like, oh. So first he was like, sorry. And I was like, hey, it's cool. No, whatever. It's a bar. And he turns around and goes, you know what? You shouldn't be standing in a busy area if you don't want people bumping into you. And it was he was looking for a reaction. And I didn't do anything heroic by any means. I didn't do anything wild or spectacular. But I did have this sort of moment of knowingness. It wasn't a conscious thought, but it was sort of a guttural feeling I had surmised him in a moment. And I was like, if this dude punches me in the face, I won't go down. And so I just kind of stood there and looked at him. And then his friends were like, dude, chill the fuck out. And came and got him. And then that was the end of it. But there was that moment of where I felt as a different person standing in that spot than if I had never been punched in the face a dozen times. I kind of recognize as you do, I understand the actual physical repercussions of a person going into conflict with me, especially if it's just this one dude. We'll see what happens. I'm willing to take that risk now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And we say in jiu-jitsu, we say get comfortable with being in uncomfortable situations, because that's really all what jiu-jitsu is about. When you got a guy who's, 200 pounds, who knows how to use his weight, and he's got you mounted and he's on top of you and he's trying his best to choke you out, you got to sit there and you got to make decisions underneath that type of pressure and think about, what do I do next? What do I address first? How do I move him? How do I off balance him? What do I have to do with my legs first? What do I have to do with my hips? There's a lot of decision making going on in that, which is another thing I love about it. We call it human chess. It's not like we're just going in there and being barbarians with each other, right? It's a thinking man's martial art. For every move, there's a counter. Right. And the most advanced guys are 2-3 moves ahead of you. So they know they're going to do something. You're going to react to it. They already know what their other moves are going to be after that to get to where they really want to be.
Yeah. And if you watch if I follow some martial arts channels on Instagram or whatever. And if you watch some of these shorts where you see amazing Brazilian jiu-jitsu move or whatever, it's the people who are like in death's grip. Like someone threw them over and they're about to go on their back, and the person's getting thrown kind of like has let it happen and then uses that momentum to somehow wind up like choking the guy out from their back.
Mhm.
Like, if you're going to throw me, I'm going to grab your arm and I'm going to throw my knee over your throat, and then you're going down. And it was just like, how did they turn that into a win? Like, this person was surely at death's door. Like, this dude was absolutely mounted, like getting tossed. And next thing you know, the guy on top's going to sleep. I think that shit's phenomenal. That's I want to say one other thing for folks who've never done BJJ. I went to one class before switching to Muay Thai because the BJJ class just did not work on my work schedule. But they taught us like 3 different chokeouts, and it's not easy. Like, especially the blood chokes. Like, I remember I was like squeezing the bejesus out of this dude, and he was totally cool with it. Like, all the muscle and strength I could muster. And then the dude was like, the instructor basically told me to check my watch. You know, I've got him all locked up. He's like, check your watch. And when I did this, and I just rotated my arm so I could see the top of my wrist, and this forearm bone went into the side here, and the dude started. And I was like, that required no effort, but I was squeezing like a motherfucker, and I could not get this dude to like even acknowledge me.
Yeah.
There's so much technique to it. It's wild.
Yeah, man. There definitely is a lot of technique to it, for sure.
And
that's another thing that makes it so beautiful, is like you could have the smaller guy can beat the bigger guy with superior technique. You know, the guy who runs my school is 150, 160 pounds, 60 years old, wipes the floor with everybody. Big guys, young guys, bodybuilders, wrestlers. He's been training for 25 years.
I think that is like the coolest thing. And, you know, we're talking about, I've been taking psychology classes. I have a psychology degree. That was my undergrad degree in college. And then I got a master's in accounting so I could get a real job, which is a whole story. But I've always been fascinated with, I remember taking the class was called, it was an upper level psychology class. It was called Conformity and Compliance. And that's where we learned all the studies, like the Xerox machine study that you mentioned, the power because. We learned foot in the door. We learned there's another thing besides foot in the door, which is like the opposite. It's like slam the door shut shit or something. I don't know. We learn all the different little persuasion techniques there. You know, like it's like straight out of Cialdini's book. And I've always been fascinated with that. And I remember in college wanting to be basically like your, 60-year-old sensei, basically wanting to be so adept at psychology that I could dexterously move through any sort of interaction like a straight G. And so when I ask you about NLP, I feel like that hunt is still on for me. And I feel like I'm so far from any sort of mastery whatsoever when it comes to human communication and dynamics. I just feel like I'm still just now learning things like, oh, wait, nice guys finish last. I guess that makes sense. Like these sorts of like things that are universally true, I'm just grasping like 10 years later. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, the nice guys finish last. That's just a belief that you have accepted. I don't necessarily believe that.
Mm-hmm.
I distill all of this persuasion stuff down to 6 things. The more these 6 things you have, these qualities, these traits, not only the more persuasive you'll be, but just the better of a communicator you'll be. And the less of them you have, the worse of a communicator you are, right? So I'll tell you what they are really quickly, and then I'll explain them to you really quickly. They're awareness, authenticity, authority, aptitude, adaptability, and articulative ability. Okay? So let's start with awareness. Awareness of what, right? In order to be truly persuasive or just be a good communicator, you need to be aware of the context, environment, and circumstance at all times. You don't talk the same way to your boss that you talk to your buddies when you're out having a beer. You don't communicate the same way at a wedding as you do at a funeral. The people that understand this really intricately and on a granular level are always the best communicators, right? They're aware of the context, environment, circumstance. They're aware of what they're saying, how they're projecting body language. They're aware of other people's body language, right? They're constantly aware of what's going on in the interaction. Next is authenticity, right? Like people have a detector, right? When it comes to people not being authentic, right? But here's the thing with that. You have to merge the gap between your authentic self and your most persuasive self, the best version of yourself in that context, environment, and circumstance. And oftentimes what I see is people are either too far to the right or too far to the left. So people that are too far to the right, they're too authentic. And their answer is, I'm just keeping it real. I am who I am. I'm not going to change for anybody, right? Well, see how far that gets you when you're not willing to change and become a better version of yourself in certain environments. Then you have other people that are on the opposite end of the spectrum, and they are trying to be too persuasive, right? So we've all met that used car salesman who's just forcing it. He's reaching. He's not authentic, right? That's that. So you have to merge the gap between being the best persuasive version of yourself while still not deviating from who you really are, right? Next is authority. This is like a Cialdini 101 thing, one of his weapons of influence. It's that, when we're in the presence of an authority, we tend to listen to them, right? When I know maybe not so much today in today's climate, depending on what state you live in. But when I was growing up, if a cop asked me a question, I answered the question. If a cop told me to do something, I did it. Why? Because they're a police officer. Same thing when you go to the doctor.
Unless they ask you to testify.
Right. That's a no-no. Right. But so like my experience whenever I go to the doctor is I have 3:00 appointment. They leave me in the waiting room till 3:45. Then they finally bring me into the examination room and I wait in there for another 45 minutes. An hour and a half later, the guy comes in. He does a few things with his stethoscope. He looks at my throat, my ear. He's like, okay, you got a strep throat. Writes me a script for amoxicillin, tells me to beat it. What do? I don't question him, right? I'm like, okay. I don't even get mad that I waited that long. He's a doctor. He's an authority, right? So next is your aptitude, which is, so your authority is like your perceived aptitude, and your aptitude is like your actual aptitude. Right. So it's one thing to be perceived as an authority in what you do, but it's another thing to actually be an authority in what you do. So your aptitude is like your skill set, your experience, your wisdom, right? The results that you're able to get for people, right? Like you could be viewed as a copywriting guru, but can you actually crank out $1 million sales letters, right? Two different things. Next is your adaptability, which means like your ability to adapt based on the context, environment, and circumstance. If you see things are changing, if you see you're losing attention, if you see you're getting body language that isn't receptive, are you able to adapt and change, ask a different question, change the direction of the conversation? And last is like just what I call your articulative ability. It's just your ability to talk about a specific topic or subject without using vocal fillers, without constantly losing your train of thought, right? Because lots of times we see that there could be a person who's more skilled, more educated, more talented, more persistent, but they lose to the person who's more articulative, to the person that can demonstrate their knowledge and their ability just in a better way than somebody else, right? Like think about the college professor that knows everything there is to know about this topic, but he bores you and puts you to sleep every single day, right? So those 6 things, if you said like, oh, I'm on this journey to learn about that, that's what it boils down to. It boils down to those 6 things. The better you become at those. Now, look, there's a myriad of skill sets that fit into those boxes, right? rapport building, body language, how to overcome objections, etc. But it's those 6 things. The more of those you have, the more persuasive you are. The less of them you have, the less persuasive you are.
Yeah. Okay. Articulate, authority. I like the authority and the aptitude. I think of that as like competence. Authority versus competence. I noticed you're using all A's there, so I can't throw competence in there because I thought about that immediately as soon as you said, what's your authority view, but what is you actually competent at? A lot of marketers fall under that umbrella of that was one of the things I noticed about you earlier when I was talking about your values. You said, what could I actually teach? You said you didn't say, what could I actually teach? You said, what am I qualified to teach or something like that.
Yeah.
A lot of marketers should ask themselves that fucking question before they start launching any more courses. What am I qualified to actually sit down and try to teach somebody? I thought that was this awareness, right?
I saw somebody in who Aaron Fletcher is.
Aaron Fletcher?
Aaron Fletcher is a marketer. He's been around for a long time, and I think he's really the best at showing people how to create world-class products and courses. He's like he's a former military guy. So he's very good at systemizing things and getting clarity on like what he calls your core currency, which is like the core thing that people walk away with as a result of going through your course or your program or whatever it is, right? And like, I'm in his Facebook group and like somebody in there was like, I'm a coach who shows people how to grow their businesses. But then they were asking him if they could get his $300 course for free because they can't afford it. And he was like, he's like, look, we could talk about it, but there's like a little bit of a disconnect there. If you're telling me you help people, you show people how to grow their businesses, but you don't have $300 to pay for a course, maybe you should rethink your approach to helping people grow their businesses. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Now, look, that's not to say that people fall into bad times. Like I was watching, like Gary Halbert, for example, was like one of those guys who was like always up and always down, like either had a lot of money or was dead broke. There are a lot of people in the direct response world that are like that have highs of highs and the lows of lows. But that's a different conversation, right? What I'm talking about is
the print. Yeah. Do you think the Prince of Pitt would be, or Prince of Print would be like, can I get that course for free though? I think,
right.
I don't see him doing that. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, it's bad publicity, baby, to be like, I help people grow their business. My business is not doing so hot right now, but I can show you how to fix yours. Like,
it's not a good look.
Not a great look. I'm one who does not throw much shade in this space. I do call out stuff like that when I see it, though. I'm not a big fan of. I also don't like people. There's a bit of a romanticized view of like spending your last dime to get this course that'll change your life or something like that. And I always try to tell people who tell me like, all I have, like, if my course is $100 and all they have is 80, like, could you sell it to me for 80? It's like, bro, if all you got is $80, just do something besides buy a course with. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I just don't like taking people's like last dollar for.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, yeah, there's one of those little values things. I try to tell people, I even say it like on my YouTubes and in my marketing. Like, if it's your last dollar, dude, just got to get yourself straight before you start taking those kinds of leaps, in my opinion. Get yourself straight. Have a little bit of a nest egg. It's my public service announcement for the day. We've got, I want to hit this home stretch. We've got about 10 minutes of time left, I would say. And that way we're on pace for what looks like another epic podcast. I took some notes earlier. One of the funny things, I started talking about Joe Dispenza, and we were talking about curing that polio, dude. I never still got to the point of bringing that up. It was the idea that the book, Breaking the Habits of Being Yourself, when you get addicted to these emotions, the emotions generate chemicals. The chemicals, this is all I was trying to say earlier, can shorten your lifespan. If they're negative chemicals, if they're bad chemicals. So I was trying to say this like 4 different ways, and I got on that stupid story. I don't think it was a stupid story, but I just got on that story. I was like, I got to tell this story. But yeah, what he talks about in that book, you can reprogram your brain to have happy chemicals instead of the sad chemicals, and you can extend your lifetime. You can make yourself healthy. I don't know about that polio case. What was the guru that did the polio thing? You remember his name? You said it earlier.
Milton Erickson.
Milton Erickson. He's the NLP guy.
Well, he was a hypnotist. The NLP guys studied him as one of the people that they wanted to create a framework based on his communication style.
I can tell, like, as soon as you bring that back up, I can tell that's something that's naturally like intriguing to me, because I can sort of like almost feel my interest like elevating, like whatever my solar plexus chakra is. I can feel energy moving from there, like up to my throat. I'm like, oh, what's that? I want to learn that mind control shit. Like, I love that stuff. And it's so powerful if you can do it and do it right. What it really comes down to, it does come down to like knowing the rules. Like you have the A's that you named, but how to execute them, how to speak the language. Because like I recognize these different little rules that they give you for like copywriting. Here's the rules, like do all this, do all this. But when I really understood like the sentences and word choices that I could select, like that's when the things changed. Like when I knew how to speak the actual language, the words, you know? So if we talk about, aptitude, awareness, authority, we know in copy how to communicate credibility. I live in such and such area code. Like I love coming up with weird ways. Like, one example that comes to mind is like a pickup thing again. Like pickup. If you want to talk to a pretty girl and you don't have any clue what you're doing, they say you should go up and just say, "Hey, you're beautiful. I wanted to say hello. I thought you're cute," or something like that. It's called direct. And there's indirect, like the masters or whatever can come up and just be like, "Man, this color wallpaper sure is lame." And the next thing you know, they're leaving in his car or something. Like, what the hell happened? I love doing stuff like that in copy, where it's like I can convey credibility by saying, like, I saw Will Smith like walking his dog down my street the other day. Like that's a weird, super indirect way to like build credibility. But like the language, everything comes down to a language. Like if there's a language of aptitude, like how do you demonstrate your aptitude? What words do you use? How do you communicate that without saying, "I'm really good at my job"? You know what I mean?
By having the ability to answer questions. Because what that does is that puts the other person in control, right? Because they're asking you questions, right? And as long as you're able to answer those questions, that's your way of demonstrating your aptitude without necessarily bragging about it.
Mm-hmm. Let's say one of the things, and the reason that I really get into this sort of topic, another one is like small talk, bar banter. Again, seeing the map and the terrain that we've been talking about. This is what I've essentially been talking about. I'm trying to see the terrain. I've always hated small talk. I've always hated bar banter. And I've sort of started to say, well, maybe it's not the small talk and the bar banter. Maybe it's this guy, right? So like, I think about things like, well, what the generic questions. Hey, what's your name? I'm Kyle. Cool. Where you from? Are you a lot of people in South Florida from like Jersey, from New York, from they're snowbirds. They're here for college or something. And it's like, okay, are you from here? Oh, cool. I'm from here too. What do you do? So there's your lineup, right? I've been studying this like I study copy. You talked about earlier, like if I could be extreme, if I could be loud or funny, I could get attention. Something that I've recognized in getting a little bit more like granular in these social interactions is it's not very different from copy, but the words you're going to use are going to be different. So like, have you ever thought about how to communicate? What do you do for a living? Not that I help business owners scale offers to blah, 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 blah. What would you say like in a bar to make it like a cool answer? You ever thought about that?
Yeah. it took me years to figure this out, because when I first got into internet marketing and people would ask me what I did, I like didn't know how to answer the question. I would like mumble over my word. Right. Now I tell people, I'm like, I own a digital publishing company. And now one of two things happens. 85% of the time, they're like, okay, wow, that's cool. Meanwhile, they have no idea what I just said.
Yeah.
Right. And the other 15% of the time, somebody will say, oh, really? So what exactly is that? What's that about? And then I kind of know where I stand with this person. Right? Is this a person that is genuinely interested in having a conversation with me? Or do they just want to hear themselves talk? And I'll tell you the truth. The majority of people fall into the category of people that just want to hear themselves talk. That's the majority of most people. In fact, I was on a podcast last week, and the guy asked me, he's like, how do you get people to like you? And I said, when you talk to people, just let them talk about themselves and take a sincere interest in them. Because number one, that's what people want to do. They want to talk about themselves. They want to talk about their life, their experiences, their habits, their hobbies, their interests, the music that they listen to, the food that they like. That's what they want to talk about most of the time. And because most people are like them, most people aren't taking a sincere interest in them and asking them and giving them that opportunity to do that. So that's how you get people to like you. It's like, just take a sincere interest in them. Probe, ask questions. Don't just stop. Don't just stop when someone gives you an answer. Probe a little bit deeper. Really? Oh, who, what, when, where? How'd you get into that? How'd that start? When did you do that? Who helped you?
When you said earlier, you said this is how I know where I stand with that person. Are you always sort of playing the meta game in conversation, like looking at the next move, or like the outline of the conversation, not just the content of the conversation? Do you know what I mean?
So here's the thing, right? I am by nature a very perceptive person. I just always have been. Like, I can tell now, talking to you, that your hair is slightly shorter than it was when we were in Orlando together. And your beard isn't as long as it was when we were in Orlando. Your beard was longer. Or at least it looked longer. Maybe it looks different on camera.
It was definitely longer. To my disappointment, I kind of want it back.
Okay. So like, these are like little things that like I can pick up on. I'll pick up on how many times somebody wore a pair of jeans. Like, if I go out with somebody a bunch of times, I'll be like, oh, that guy wore those jeans 2 months ago when I saw him, or he wore that shirt. And it's just something that is like embedded in me, right? I'm just a very perceptive person. Like, my antennas are always up. And so when I talk to people, I'm not necessarily playing a meta game with them, but I'm unconsciously competent when it comes to the vibes that I get from them. So, like, for example, if somebody asks me what I do for a living and I say I own a digital publishing company, and they're like, oh, wow, cool. And then they just move on to the next thing, I kind of know that they're not really interested in learning more about that. Like, it's, you know what I'm saying? It's like a telltale sign. So
I totally get where you're. I was sitting beside a dude at a bar. One of my cousins came to visit from Illinois, so she comes down to South Florida. So we take her out. We go to like beach. We do like all this Florida stuff. We end up at like a bar, and I'm sitting at the bar ordering a beer, and the dude beside me, I wish I'd have done a better job bookmarking this conversation in my head. The dude turns to me and he goes, can you tell me what kind of cards are poker? And I was like, I don't understand your question. He's like, this guy, I asked him what he does. He says, plays poker, but there's this, there's this, there's this, there's this. What kind of poker? Did you just know what poker is if someone says poker? And I remember telling that dude that question wasn't that deep. I was like, he's just answering your question. I was like, I already know what you're like. The dude was mad that he wouldn't give him more details about what he does for a living. And I was like, the dude was probably like 21 and an hour old. You know what I mean? Like he was like a drunk college kid trying to strike up conversation. And he was like genuinely frustrated this other guy wouldn't talk about his job. And I was like, you are not understanding the context of the situation that you're in. Like this dude does not want to sit here and explain to you what he does for work. He said poker so he could just give you an answer. So this guy was not like registering the vibe. I knew that from 2 bar stools away. Like I never met that dude or heard him say a word, but I knew from being in that context, that situation, that he was just like, okay, I play poker. That's the end of that conversation. So I don't know, man. I feel like
and by the way, look, by the way, just because somebody doesn't take a sincere interest or wants to know more about me or what I do, I don't write them off. Like, look, one of my best friends in the world, who I've known for 30 years, who's like one of my closest friends. I love him to death and I would do anything for him. But he's a one-way conversation type of guy. So he'll call you up and tell you everything that's going on in your life. But if you tell him one thing that's going on in your life, he'll just be like, oh yeah, cool. Like he'll never ask a probing question. So if I tell him, like, and he's a marketer too. So if I tell him, like, oh man, I just launched this campaign, it's a home run, it's killing it, he won't be like, really? So what is it? What did you do? What's it about? He'll just be like, oh yeah? Ah, that's cool, man. That's cool. And he will never call me and ask me how my business is doing unless his business is not doing well. So he'll be like, let me ask you a question. How are your open rates lately? Right? Because he just wants to know if they're better or worse than his. But that doesn't make him a bad guy. He's actually a great person in many other ways and would do anything for me. But that's just, he's not on that level when it comes to communication. Like he doesn't really care about kind of like what's going on in your life to that. I mean, look, if I told him I had a serious problem, of course he'd be like, what's going on? But just one of those things, man. People are like that sometimes.
I get it. So when you're chatting up people, like, do you go to like marketing events and stuff like that? Do you network? Do you meet people out in those kinds of places?
I don't. So the I used to go to tons of masterminds in 2010, 2011, 2009. What's interesting is, so this friend whose business I helped build through the copywriting with all the self-improvement offers, these guys used to participate in launches all the time. And they would always come in like the first top 5 in like Mind Movies launch, Bob Proctor's launch, Mindvalley launch, right? So they would always get invited to these masterminds. But my friend doesn't like to fly, hates flying. He's never been on a plane in his life. He's terrified of it. So he would tell me, you go to the masterminds, we'll pay for everything. You go, you do all the networking, and any JVs that you land, you'll get a percentage of. So I was like, all right, like, you mean to tell me I'm going to go and for 3 or 4 days, I'm going to go to San Diego and eat and drink like a pirate and friggin' hang out with people and network. And then on top of that, I'm going to get paid for any deals I land while I'm down there. Sign me up. So I was going to tons of those types of masterminds back then. But I'll be honest with you, they never really did anything for me because all I felt was like, they were just measuring contests, bro.
I know what you mean.
Here's how much money I'm making. Here's how I crushed it. Here's what I just did, and I was just like, So since then, and then we actually put on our own mastermind. We did for a couple of years when the ClickBank event was in. They used to do the ClickBank event, the East Coast one in New York City. So my friend and I, we would do, it was more his thing. He would do like these dinners and masterminds. But other than that, man, I didn't go to any masterminds until top one. And that was by far not only, it was just good in so many different ways. You know that. It's people. I mean, everybody there is just it's the caliber of people, not only just from like a business perspective, like they're just, everybody in there is killing it and they're all exceptional at what they do. They're just all great people. You know, me and you vibed, right? We hung out every night, talked. Rob Kosberg, such a great guy. Like I talked to him for a while. Kevin Rogers, like, come on, who cannot be around that guy for, you know, less than 5 minutes and not feel good? You know, just good people. So no masterminds for me, or no marketing events up until that one.
See,
but
yeah,
I'm down to maybe go to a few in the future if you want to link up and we go together. I'm down to go to like a funnel hacking live or one of those things. I know that one
yeah. I saw an Instagram post about it, and I think traffic and conversions is like next week or something like that. Do you go to that?
That's in San Diego, right? Or San Francisco?
Yeah.
I'm kind of like on a 2.5 to 3 hour like flight limit, man. I don't like flying either.
Mm-hmm.
If it's for something like really worth it, I'll do it. But
well, okay, yeah. I thought about going. If I get one more YouTube ad, I can't wait for that thing to be over, so I don't have to hear that stupid YouTube ad anymore. But one of the things that, you know, you mentioned was that, you know, I remember because we sat down and ate that first night, and I was like, "Sup?" You're like, "Sup?" And it was like, "Okay, this guy's chill." And I don't have like that meta perceptive thing. I think what I generally do is, if like, I think what it is for me personally is, if you hadn't just like asked me one of the generic questions and then let the conversation die, I'll probably vibe with you. I know what the script is. It's like, hey, what's your name? Where you from? What do you do? And if you don't ask those in that order and then let the conversation die at each of those, which is what most people do, I was like, I could probably talk to this person. But that's, you know, that's something I was wondering about, like when you were going to these events, and, you know, it's like, I feel like networking is too much of a mission. I try to, you know, it's almost like you were talking about, like meeting girls at work, and I'm gonna eventually date this girl. First, I got to vibe with her, and we'll hang out here, and we know we'll see each other again because work. So I don't have to like rush things. I don't have to like ask for your business card within the first 10 minutes or anything like that. It's kind of how I look at those networking things. And I was kind of interested to know if like you ever use that sort of meta, like, were you ever on a mission and like you knew like you were going to extract any sort of like information or persuade someone? You ever like use any of those dark arts or anything like that when you're like, or you just like go in a vibe?
I'll tell you a funny story. So number one, the dark arts thing, I've never used it. In fact, I don't like, it's funny. People in the persuasion space like those kinds of products, like how to covertly persuade people without them knowing and all that they're like really into that stuff. And I have written books on stuff like that. It's not something that I do. Like I've never had that approach with anybody. But I'll tell you a funny story. Funny story was, so back then when I was still working for my friend, one of the things that I was doing besides copywriting was I would line up JV deals. And so what that consisted of is I would go on ClickBank every night for like 3 or 4 hours after I got home from work. I'd go on ClickBank and I would just go through every single category, every offer in the self-help or the spirituality category. And I would email the offer owner and just be like, hey, would you like to do a JV with us? Here's our list size. Here's the kind of our offers, blah, blah, blah. And then I would get a percentage of, you know, whatever those JV deals turned out to be. So this was back when like email marketing was like really, really like powerful. I'm not saying it isn't today, but things are a little bit different today than they were, you know, a decade ago with Apple and the open, you know, Apple Opens and privacy and spam box and promotion folders and stuff like that. And so back then, like email marketing was like very powerful. So my friend at that time, he had a list of like, I don't know, 75,000, 100,000 people maybe. Literally every time he sent an email, he made $6,000 every time. And he emailed like every day.
Yeah, I would too.
He emailed like every single, because remember, I told you I wrote over 100 sales letters for these guys. So they had offers just to constantly rotate. So I find this guy in the numerology space on ClickBank. He's got a list of 1.5 million people at the time. Not only do I land a JV with him, but he was going to one of these masterminds because I think he promoted Mind Movie's launch, and he was like number 3, and then my friend was like number 5. So when we figured out that we were both going to be at the same event, my friend was like, go talk to him and see if we can work out a deal where he only had one product, but he had this giant list. And my friends had this process. They were just product creation machines because they just had a whole system for product creation. I was the copywriter. They had the guy who created the products, and it was all this stuff, right? So I did go there with that intention, but not to like manipulate him or schmooze him, just to like talk to him about this idea. And he was all for it. He's like, yeah, let's do it. I got the back end. I have the big list. I need stuff to promote to them. You guys make world-class products, blah, blah, blah. And bro, when I tell you, I met this guy for lunch in the daytime, and then we had the mastermind at night. I walked away from that meeting thinking I was set for life. I was like, that's it. I'm set for life. This guy's got a huge list. My friend's got this product line. I'm going to get a commission every time these guys do a deal together. I went like shopping in like the outdoor San Diego mall. I bought myself a chain. I bought myself a new pair of sneakers. I spent like $500 while I was down there. I was like, who cares? I'm set for life now. That deal that we did together bombed. Absolutely bombed. For whatever reason, we just could not make it work. And that was another harsh lesson that I learned in life. Never count your chickens or your eggs or whatever it is before they hatch. Like nothing is guaranteed. You don't know if something's going to work out until you actually launch it. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best, but nothing is guaranteed, right? That's just the way it is.
That's I can tell you there's been a couple times. One of them for me, I did a promo for Robert Kiyosaki, the Rich Dad Poor Dad guy. And I was already telling my friends and my old lady at the time, I was telling everybody, I was like, that's it. Like this dude is worldwide famous. I was like, we're going to do this promo. There's no one who's going to say no to it. Like we're going to be set. It did work. But it was just a promo. Like it was just, I made a royalty check just the same as any other promo. And it wasn't like fantastic. It wasn't a bomb. But I thought there's been a couple moments in my life. There was another one at Wealth Press too. I've had those moments. Okay. I got one little last closing remark and then I'll let you get out of here. 3 hours and 12 minutes. I'm proud of it. The one time I actually did try to use, it's not really like dark arts. You ever read Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss?
Yes.
Of course you have. I did go to, I think it was Copy Chief Live. It might have been like in 2019 or 2019. And I did the mirroring and labeling routine where you just repeat the last 3 words of the thing the person said. To great effect. I was really surprised at how well it worked. That was like probably the most meta I've ever been about like, I'd done phone sales before. I was pretty meta where I was steering the conversation exactly where I wanted it to go. But like in real time with regular people that I had just met, that was probably the most powerful and effective strategy for like, in a way, I wouldn't say controlling the conversation because I didn't get to steer it. But forwarding the conversation and seeing like what you said, like they just want to talk about themselves. If I just sat there and just kept repeating their last couple words, like I could get someone to just talk. It was wild, man.
So look, I think like I always tell people persuasion and manipulation involve the same set of techniques, the same set of approaches. The only difference is the intent of the end user. That's it.
Mm.
If your goal is to get something out of somebody that's not necessarily beneficial to them and it's only beneficial to you, it's manipulation, right? If you're doing something for a win-win or for a greater cause, or to maybe like build some rapport so that you build a strong relationship with somebody that you value and you want to take in the right direction, there's nothing wrong with that. Mirroring and matching works because we do that by nature, unconsciously, like I talked about before, with conscious and unconscious body language. If you watch, I always tell people, if you want to learn about body language, either watch TV with the volume off or go to the park and watch how couples or friends interact with each other. And you'll see that when two people are in rapport, if you and I were having a beer at a table and I was sitting up like this and you were sitting up like that, we'd be in rapport. If I sat back like this and you sat back like that, we'd be in rapport. Very rarely are you going to see two guys who are like really good friends, having a good time. They're at a table and they're in rapport, and one guy's in like this and the other guy is back like this. Unless that guy hears something that changes the conversation and he's like, wow. But if the normal flow of conversation is going, you're not going to see one person leaned in and the other person totally leaned back because they're not in rapport. When two people are on the same wavelength, their body language naturally mirrors each other.
Very interesting. That stuff, yeah. I gotta manually shut it down because it's the kind of conversation that I could have for days, which I think I need to get more people, more marketers on here and just pick their brains about persuasion hacks and tricks and stuff. I gotta stop. I'm about to go back into another one. All right, I'm gonna stop for real. All right, Paul, thanks so much for doing this. We didn't have one bathroom break in 3 hours and 16
I know. I'm ready for one.
I am proud of myself. I'm proud of both of us. Thanks for coming on, dude. It's always a treasure. It's a blast to talk to you, man. It's always great.
Same here.
Thanks so much to you. Thanks everyone who was here. We had a steady stream of people the whole time. Thanks for tuning in, and peace out, Copy Squad.
Later, brother.
All right, that's the